Well, good morning and welcome to this meeting of the Tennessee Trial Court Vacancy Commission. I am Bill Koch. It's my privilege to be the chair of the commission. On behalf of my colleagues, we want to thank Rutherford County for their hospitality. It's always a delight to come down to Rutherford and Cannon County and to participate in proceedings in this beautiful court. I still call it a courtroom. That shows you how far I go back, but this beautiful capitol. I want to welcome all of our 7 applicants today. We understand the challenge of submitting a lengthy application, the selection process, and we admire and appreciate each of your desire to pursue a circuit court position. For the members of the public who are here just out of interest, and for those of you that are viewing us on television, we welcome your interest. The judiciary is a very fundamental part of our state government. The judges, the men and women on the bench, serve very important and significant roles, so the selection of those judges is a very important matter, and I can assure you that the 11 members of this commission take their roles very seriously, work very hard, travel from Mountain City to Memphis to discharge their obligations, so we're just glad that the public is interested and wants to view what we're doing. I want to thank Brian Robertson and all the other county officials who helped with the arrangements in setting this up today. And I particularly want to thank Debbie Hayes, our intrepid support personnel who goes with us wherever we are, make sure that we're fed, make sure that we're in the same place at the same time. We couldn't do what we do without Debbie, so thank you so much, Debbie. This would be a good occasion for the members of the commission to introduce themselves, and if we will, we'll start with Brad.
Good morning, I'm Brad Botts. I live in Jackson, Tennessee, and I practice civil litigation practice as regional in nature.
I'm Beverly Nelms. I practice with Francis McConnell and Seymour in Knoxville, Tennessee. I have a general civil practice.
Hal North, I'm attorney to Chambliss, Bonner, and Stoffel in Chattanooga, and I have a general civil practice.
Don McCleary from Hum.
You turned me on. Tom Lawless. I have a general practice in Nashville.
David Golden, in-house corporate practice in Kingsport, Tennessee.
And I'm Bill Koch. I'm the dean of the Nashville School of Law. We also are very concerned about not only fairness, but the appearance of fairness. So our bylaws and our custom is to have each of us individually have searching inquiries of ourselves about whether we have any conflicts of interest with regard to one or more of the applicants today. And when we believe that there is a conflict of interest, we step out. We also discuss those potentials among ourselves to make sure that we're all on the same song sheet. And today we have no conflicts that we think require recusal, but there are a number of members of the commission that believe it's appropriate to make an announcement in the event that any of the applicants are concerned about any connections we may have. And I'll use myself as an example. 4 of the 7 applicants are graduates of the Nashville School of Law. Some of them had me for a teacher. I don't hold that against them if they won't hold that against me. And I don't view that as a reason why I can't consider these applications. Are there other members that want to announce any relationship?
You know, I know all the applicants, some better than others. But I've got countless number of cases with many of them, appeared before 2 of them a number of times, but I don't view any of that as a conflict.
And I would just mention that Assistant District Attorney Mary Catherine White, who works in our office, is speaking on behalf of one of the candidates today, but I don't view that as a conflict either.
Anything else to announce? Do any of the applicants have any concern about any of us participating in these proceedings today? Well, as they say in other contexts, speak now or forever hold your peace. Let me outline just very quickly how this matter will proceed today. First, each applicant will be given an opportunity to introduce herself or himself, and during that 5-minute opportunity, you'll have an opportunity to make your own presentation. If you wish to share some or all of your time with someone else who is speaking on your behalf, this would be the time to do that. We are going to proceed today in reverse alphabetical order. So if you're trying to figure out who's going to go first, now you know. After those individual introductions, I'm going to invite any members who are here, any members of the audience who are here, if they have any desire to oppose any one or more of the applicants, they will have an opportunity to address the commission at that point to express their concerns. After that, we will proceed with the interviews of each of the candidates. And as I say, we'll be going in reverse alphabetical order, and when I call your name, you can come up to the podium and we can begin the discussion. For those of you who have not been through this process before, we have a custom of asking one member of the commission to have an individual, more in-depth conversation in advance of this meeting with each applicant. Those assignments are made randomly. We have those interviews to enable someone on the commission to get behind the written application to find out more about the applicant that might be on paper. That individual will begin the questioning for the applicant that they've already talked to. The member of the commission that's doing that is not an advocate. They're simply a facilitator for that process. And then after the initial questioning, every member of the panel will have an opportunity to ask any questions that he or she may have. Let me tell you that the fact that any one or more members of the panel do not ask questions does not reflect their lack of interest in the applicant, does not reflect that they're not paying attention, does not reflect that they're against that applicant. It simply means that the questions that they may have already been answered in the initial review. And so for some of you, if you're worried 3 of them didn't ask me questions, you should pay little attention to that. This is not a trial proceeding. There's no cross-examinations here. There are no summations. If I had to describe the proceeding, I would say that we are professionally informal. This is a conversation, not an inquisition. Once the final interviews are completed, it is our practice, and we will do this again today, we will immediately take a vote. We vote, of course, anonymously. Today there are 9 members of the commission sitting, so in order to have your name passed to the governor, you'll need 5 votes. If we do that on the first ballot, then we will announce the persons who will be selected. If later ballots are required, we will continue balloting until we have the requisite 3 applicants. Any questions about the process? Any other statements from any members of the commission? If not, Mr. Ward, you're first up. Welcome.
Good morning. My name is Charles Ward. I have been a practicing lawyer here in the state of Tennessee since 1991. My background is a little bit different in that I was a police officer while I went through the National School of Law, and then I did that about 8.5 years. And in that, my perspective, I think that I saw the beginning stages of most people's life that end up in court after that. But I had to make decisions, unlike court, I had to make decisions in minutes instead of hours. But I dealt with really the same people that I deal with today. My practice is about equally domestic, civil, and criminal defense. My first job that I got out of law school was Judge Don Ash. I ran into him as a police officer in a good way, and I interacted with him, and he said, if you pass the bar, come see me, and I'll give you a job. So the day that I passed the bar, back then they put it on I think it's called the L&C building in Nashville, so you had to go and physically look at it. I started with the A's, and my wife started with the W's, so she found out before I did. But so as soon as I passed the bar, I drove straight back to Murfreesboro, found Don Ash, and he gave me a job. Since that time, my practice has, in criminal defense, I've done anything from public drunks to first-degree murder. And on civil aspect, most of my cases involve divorces, but a lot of times in today's climate, a lot of the divorces interact with the criminal aspect all the time. They intertwine. So I think that aspect helps me just to facilitate the case and understand the aspects of it. And another part of my background, I think, being a police officer, is that there are two sides to every story. And I have to take the time and listen to those people. Just like today, I listen to the client, but just because they tell me that doesn't mean it's all the truth. I take it and try to figure out from which direction to go in each case. As a judge, my position would be to hear that. It's a different aspect. I'm a very zealous advocate of my clients. But as a judge, I have to listen to it, and I think that's an extreme quality that you have to have. A humble quality, listen, and give the people that come before you the dignity they deserve. Most people just want to be heard. And I think if you listen to them, it doesn't mean you have to listen to them for a month, but I think if you listen to them, listen to what they've got to say, and sometimes it's not where they win or lose, it's just, will you listen to my story? If you listen to my story and they walk out of the courtroom, win or lose, that makes them feel good. And I think as a judge, you have to give people the dignity, respect them, whether they're rich, poor, whether they're represented by an attorney or not, give them the opportunity to be heard, and then make a decision based on the law. Not create the law, just follow the law. To this day, I still, after I've been practicing 27 years, I still get nervous when I do cases. I still do. I work on Sunday nights till midnight, and I get up at 4 a.m. just to make sure that I don't have any stone unturned. And as a judge, I think you have to do the same thing. You have to be prepared for the cases because they're all different. And I think you have to be prepared for those cases. No matter what comes before you, be fair and impartial and treat people with kindness. And I think that goes a long way. There was a judge that used to be in this very courtroom, and I would never, and it always amazed me that he would send people to prison and they would thank him. And it's not because, hey, you sent me to prison. It's because you treated me with dignity and respect, and they appreciate that. And I think as a judge, I would strive to be prepared, to be honest, and treat people with dignity. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ward. Mr. Scarlett?
Morning. I've asked Barry Tucker to speak on my behalf, and then following his comments, I'll fill the time that I have left.
Great, thank you.
Good morning. Thank you very much for your time, Mr. Chairman, Commissioners. My name is Barry Tucker, and I've been a resident of this great state of Tennessee for about 40 years. And during that time, I graduated from high school in Franklin County, went to undergrad at Tennessee Tech, got my PharmD at the University of Tennessee. I truly love this state. And so nothing makes me more proud than to see Tennesseans continue to do well. And so that was the thing that I was excited when I got the opportunity to come here and talk with you this morning about. I've known Darrell Scarlett for well over 10 years. Many times I've gone to him to talk about contracts, to talk about business interests, investments. He represented me in a divorce. The things that I consider most important about Darrell, I've never seen him go on a rant. I've never seen any drama from him. Every time I approach him about anything to do with law or business, it's just that same fruitful conversation that I've always found very helpful. one of the things that I've found as a professional, I'm actually a global medical affairs director for Merck. One of the things that I've found is I interview a lot of people, I hire a lot of people, and I promote a lot of people all over the world. And so I have to look for consistencies amongst the people from a global perspective. So generally what I look for is the person knowledgeable? Is the person able to display that at will? Are they compassionate about what they do? And do they do the right thing, and will they do that a long time? I've seen this from Daryl Scarlett since the first day I met him. No doubt in my mind about that. Daryl and I occasionally eat lunch together, probably 50-plus times. We've been on trips outside of Murfreesboro, sometimes across the country, sometimes out of the country. The things that I've seen Daryl consistently do is he's a good lawyer, he's a good friend, and he represents what I think is a solid moral person every day that I see him. And that means a lot. The next thing that I'll tell you is probably the most clear thing that I can tell you while I'm standing here. I'm a proud father of 2 children. One's a senior in high school. JT is a pitcher for Central Magnet baseball team. He'll probably be valedictorian unless he drops off his current path next year when he graduates. My daughter's a freshman cheerleader at Siegel High School, Dean's List member. She'd be at the church more often than the preacher if they gave her a key. It's not that I think they'll need legal representation, but he is on their phone and on their school records as their emergency contact. He's a solid person. He makes good decisions every time. So with that, let me summarize and tell you this. I think Daryl Scarlett is very knowledgeable of the law. He's compassionate about what he does, and he cares about people and the people he affects by what he does. So I have no reservations whatsoever when I tell you this morning, I'm proud to speak on Daryl's behalf today, and I think your task of filling the seat would be fulfilled if you choose him.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm applying for this job because I think I have the qualities that are necessary to do this job and do this job well. First is experience. I've been practicing law 30 years. I've tried thousands of divorce cases, which comprises about 70% or better of all cases filed in Rutherford and Cannon County. I've tried hundreds of civil cases. I've tried jury trials on behalf of the plaintiff, won some, lost some, tried some on behalf of the defendant. So I've done both sides of that. I've been involved in cases in property disputes, governmental taxation, and other issues. That experience has given me the wisdom to make good, sound decisions. In my mediation practice, I'm very fortunate that I have a high success rate of helping people resolve their problems. And finally, is temperament. We've all, I hope, had the good fortune to be in front of a judge, and you get through the case, whether you win or lose, and you say, you know, I wish I could try every one of my cases in front of that judge. And that's the judge I want to be, and if I'm appointed, that's the judge I'll strive to be.
Thank you very much. Thank you both. Mr. Moffitt?
Good morning, and I'd like to thank you for your time and efforts in being here today. I recognize that this takes time away from your own personal practices and from your families, and I appreciate you putting in the time to be here. If there was one thing I'd want you to know about me at the end of the meeting today, it's that I have a great respect and a great passion for the practice of law. When I decided to go to law school, I envisioned myself going and doing real estate transactions or probate law. When I came back here to Murfreesboro after undergraduate and began to work with a local attorney, and I went with him to the courthouse one day. After filing some papers, I peeked in a window and looked in the courtroom, and I just got the greatest thrill looking at the bench and the witness stand, the jury box, and I just knew then that I wanted to be a litigator. When I went to law school, I can't think of many classes that I didn't just thoroughly enjoy learning the principles, the doctrines, the reasoning, the logic underlying each of those different subjects in law. When I graduated, I had an opportunity to work with a great firm down in Memphis, Tennessee, in the area of medical malpractice defense. I had certain goals coming out that I wanted to get into a good firm that would really put me through the ringer and really give me a good firm foundation for my legal career, and I was able to find that. worked with some great attorneys who held me to high standards, and I really learned a lot from them. Many of you are probably aware that around 2008, there was some changes made to the medical malpractice statute, and by 2011, I realized that those cases were really trending downward, and I realized I needed to widen my professional wheelhouse if I wanted to keep feeding my family. So my wife and I looked around the state. I'm from a farm over in Van Buren County, and she's from here in Rutherford County. And so we compromised and moved by her family here in Rutherford County. But coming here to Rutherford was a no-brainer, and I think we saw what so many people are seeing and why this position is available now, is that this is just a great place to come and live and raise a family. So in 2011, we moved here from Memphis, and my office is in Nashville. I cover the entire state, and I work in the area of insurance defense, which many of you know is a very broad area. And so I had an opportunity to come in and learn a new area of law. In 2013, my company asked me to go and become licensed in the state of Georgia. And so I went and I didn't learn a new area of law, but I learned an entire new body of law and new rules and statutes, and they do things differently down there. But I had an opportunity to do that, and I not only learned it, but I excelled at it. And so the reason I bring this up is I think that it's important to realize that as a circuit court judge, circuit court is a court of general jurisdiction. Every day you're going to have various issues come in front of you. And you need someone that has a proven track record that they can go out and learn different areas of law, whether that be employment, property, personal injury, or family law. And that you need to be able to become educated on that and make proper rulings that are appropriate. I think I'm the only applicant here today who doesn't have a local practice here in Murfreesboro. It's much broader. It covers not only this state, but portions of Georgia. And so I think that kind of sets me apart. It's been my experience that people are good at things that they enjoy. And I want you to know that I enjoy learning, I enjoy the practice of law, and I enjoy being in a courtroom. And I wouldn't be here today if I didn't think I had the qualities, the temperament, the knowledge to be a good circuit court judge. And I appreciate your consideration for that. Thank you.
Lynch?
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Usually when I come in front of a podium, I ask the court, can I have permission to step away from it? Today, oddly enough, I kind of want to stand behind it. Today, I'm asking for your nomination, for your vote as the next circuit court judge for the 16th Judicial District. But before you make that choice, I'm going to ask you to hear from somebody that knows me better than anybody else. And she knows the good and the bad. Most of the people that she helps know her as a licensed clinical social worker. I know her as the mother of our 2 children. Fun fact for you, she is my ex-wife. So trust me when I say no one in this courtroom is more anxious to hear what she has to say about me than me. It should be fun, if nothing else. So ladies and gentlemen, at this time, I would like to present to you Mrs. Charity McMackis.
Good morning. I appreciate you said that this was a conversation. I'm used to having conversations all the time, just in a much smaller place and space with people one-on-one. So if you guys will bear with me, I'll probably be reading a lot because I'm a bit nervous. I am Charity McMackins. I'm a state licensed clinical social worker and have been since 2013. I've been employed as a therapeutic social worker in the state of Tennessee since 2001. During that time, I've worked in the court systems before judges in Mid-Cumberland, Upper Cumberland, South Central, and Davidson County on behalf of and to advocate for clients in numerous civil cases. These experiences have allowed me the opportunity to observe qualities and traits that exemplify and honor the role of judge, traits such as practical legal knowledge, the ability to listen and discern, impartiality, objectivity, humility, and effective decision-making. The ability to attend and fulfill a role when human emotion would say to do something else, tenacity, commitment, education, critical thinking. So you might wonder why Trevor asked me to speak here today. I kind of did too. However, his point was exceptionally truthful and vulnerable. I do know him at his absolute best and worst. As a co-parent, I've seen Trevor grow and demonstrate the ability to make rational decisions when feelings say to react in anger or fear. I've seen him humble and fair when it wasn't fun or comfortable or convenient. As a wife, when we were married, I witnessed his loyalty to the legal profession, the DA's office, the passion he poured into prosecution, and the tenacity to hold to his position as ADA when leaving seemed more lucrative, more flexible, or even simply more prestigious. I've seen him attend meetings, juggle obligations with the community, and convene with lawyers, caseworkers, family members, and victims. I've seen him grapple over the overall human burden of aching over someone's loss or injury and still hold to the commitment of the law. Don't get me wrong. As a prosecutor and parent and ex-spouse, Trevor can be stubborn and unmoving. He can argue and question a person to the point of exhaustion. But at the center of his focus is the desire to understand and uncover a path to justice, growth, and healing. I asked my boys, our boys, why Dad would make a good judge, and my oldest said, because he listens really well. Wouldn't it be easier if that were the only thing, right? But to listen, we have to hear. And I truly believe through education, experience, and many years of personally challenging himself, Trevor is capable and ready of hearing what is required and obligating himself to the commitment of being judge, and in doing so, will respectfully fulfill and ethically be committed to the professional commitment this position presents. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you both. Aishide? Good morning.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the commission. You said my name right. That was great. My name is Lisa Aishide, and what I'm going to do today is I'm going to give the mic to a great friend of mine. It's Gary Whitaker, and Gary is the Assistant City Manager for the City of Murfreesboro, and he's in charge of the economic development. So with further ado, I'm going to give it to Gary.
Members of the commission, again, my name's Gary Whitaker. I'd like to put my city manager hat on just for a moment and welcome all you to our wonderful city. And if you hadn't had time, I hope you make time to go see our judicial building. It's a wonderful asset to our town, just as this wonderful building is, and welcome. Lisa, myself went from high school to today. We've known each other. I was going to tell you 30 plus years, and I did the math. It's 40 years. I'm older than her, and I want that on the record. I'm hoping that's going to help my case after I walk away from here. But through that time, went through high school, Middle Tennessee State, watched her go off to UT, graduate with a law degree, and she came home to practice. As all young attorneys, she went in and practiced with a firm. You know, it's one thing to go off and get the book knowledge. Then you have to come home and do the real work, and that's learn how to handle yourself in court, how to handle cases. And she did that, honed her skills, and she continued to build clients. And one day she called me. I get a lot of calls from Lisa. I was the building codes director at that time. She said, I'm ready to buy a building, open my practice. So I went and looked at a building with her. She purchased the building, started her own practice. Her practice grew. Wasn't long, she had 2 or 3 other attorneys in there with her. Now, the interesting part here is that we're a large town. We're grown to about 130,000. We were about 27,000 at the time, but we're still a small community. And with electronic media, news travels fast. And your reputation makes or breaks you in any business, whether it's a restaurant, heat and air, or whether you're an attorney. Lisa has an impeccable history of being fair, honest. In her practice, she won a lot of cases. Her client base built. One day I walk into city court. thinking Judge Ewing Sellers would be there. I had cited somebody to court. Again, I was a building codes director. Behind the bench was Lisa. I'm not sure who was the most kind of shocked, was never seen Lisa in a robe before. But, and the best I can recollect, she ruled against me, which told me a couple of things. One, she makes decisions based upon the law and the merits of the case, not who's standing in front of her. But that was one of many times that she sat in for a city judge. Not long after that, she calls me and says, I want to run for the judgeship that's open. 9 people had put their name in. I told her I'd be happy to help her because I knew that she would give it 110%. And she did, and she won. The ultimate compliment to anybody is when you run for public office and the people in your community vote you in because they tell you they have confidence in you, in your decision making, and who you are and what you stand for. Now, if you take anything away from what I say today, I hope the one thing you remember is that Lisa, all the applicants are qualified, but the one thing I want you to remember about Lisa is she loves what she does. She truly does, and she's good at it. And she gives 110%. And if you ever meet Lisa, she'll remember you. And if you ever meet her, you'll remember her. So please, remember this. She loves what she does, and she has a passion for that. And if you have a passion for something that you do, you can't help but succeed. Thank you for giving me this time. Lisa, thank you, and it's an honor to speak for her today.
Thank you, Mr. Whitaker. Appreciate it. Mr. Dodd? Good morning.
No, I'm Adam Dodd, and I've learned in preparing for this that it's much harder to prepare for 5 minutes than it is for 20 or 30. As lawyers, we can talk and talk and talk, but brevity sometimes eludes us. You have my application, and I'm sure later on we're going to visit about the details of my experience. I wanted to give you a little background about me personally. I grew up about an hour from here in McMinnville, Warren County, Tennessee. I moved to Murfreesboro in 1989 for good. I'd just done a year of active duty for the Tennessee Air National Guard and came back and to finish my education here at MTSU. I graduated from there in '92 with a degree in aerospace technology and frankly thought I would spend my professional life in the world of aviation. Something gnawed at me, though, that wasn't quite fully fulfilled. And eventually that led me to apply to law school. I went to the National School of Law, graduated there in 1992, and began practicing law here in Murfreesboro. In 2006, I had the opportunity to serve as magistrate for the juvenile court. I did that while I practiced law on a part-time basis. Initially, just when the judge needed some help, dockets were overloaded. She needed to be somewhere else. I started hearing cases for her. In 2012, when this body recommended the late Judge Keith Siskin for the circuit court judgeship, and the governor eventually appointed him to that position, he vacated the full-time position, and Judge Davenport appointed me to that role, and that's the role I serve in today. Excuse me. As the juvenile court magistrate, I have an incredible opportunity and privilege to serve the families and children of Rutherford County. As you, I'm sure, are aware, it's a difficult task. As our county has grown, the problems of our county and our family and children have grown exponentially. I have the experience from sitting on the bench in juvenile court to hear cases, all types of cases. We do delinquent cases, termination of parental rights cases, dependency and neglect cases, severe abuse cases, child support, which I did for many years, and child custody from unwed parents. That has all taught me my service in the Guard, my service as a lawyer, and as juvenile court magistrate has taught me that it's important to be of service. And that's why I'm here today, to ask for yet another opportunity to be of service as the next circuit court judge for this judicial district. The district has a long history of distinguished and dedicated judges. It's humbling to think that I might follow in the footsteps of those who have served before. I'm proud to be a member of this local bar. The practice of law here has always been challenging, but also a joy. The lawyers that we practice with, most of whom I know who have appeared in front of me and who will come behind me, are all very professional. They work well together. And I've never had an issue in my courtroom with troublesome attorneys. Litigants, sometimes they can be difficult. We see a lot of pro se folks in juvenile court, so it's a challenge to work through that. I look forward later on to answering any questions that you have about my application, about my details of my experience. I did have a varied practice when I practiced law. Obviously, I did juvenile court work. I did a lot of real estate work, a lot of closing, transactional work, but I also did litigation and civil and criminal matters as well. So I look forward to our discussion later on today, and I thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. Ms. Blaylock-Hauser. Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you all so much for coming here today and for your service. Upon looking at what your job description is, I don't know how you all are able to manage it, and I certainly am very honored to be here today. I'm also honored to have Ms. Mary Catherine White, who is Assistant District Attorney over in Williamson County, along with Ms. Helper, as she had mentioned earlier. But I'm most honored to call her my friend. She has been my friend for 30-something years. She knows me from the tops of the mountain to the valleys and everything in between. And so without further ado, I will pass the microphone to Ms. White.
Thank you. Hey, good morning.
Good morning. I'm very honored to be here on behalf of Michelle today, and I hope I can get through this without crying, which is very odd for me to say because I have been a prosecutor now for almost 21 years. I started in Sullivan County and have worked in the 21st Judicial District for 18 years. So I have seen a lot of judges in my time. But when I think about Michelle and why she should be one of the nominees that you send up for the governor's consideration, it has to do with her character. And I want to talk to you a little bit about our friendship, as she mentioned, because I see in Michelle a lot of the things that I hope that I have. I see the loyalty that she has. She is loyal to a fault to her friends. She also has a unique ability in her professional life to take away the emotion that accompanies a large part of her caseload in dealing with domestics. And I know that because not only am I her friend, I was her client. When I went through my divorce in 2011, I turned to Michelle because I learned over the years that if you want something done, she's your girl. I know that because on the day my father passed away, when I got that call in 2007, I was with Michelle. I was married at the time, and my husband was deployed with the Tennessee Air National Guard. He was in Germany, and that's all I knew. But who took the reins and who got him home? Who found him? Who got him home? This girl. She got the phone. She was there for not only me, but for my mother, for my brother. Her daughter is here. Her mother is here. And that's one of the things that when I see how she interacts with her family, her mother's health is declining. Who steps up to take care of her along with her sister? That would be Michelle Blaylock-Hauser. I've known Michelle since way before the birth of her daughter. I have a 13-year-old daughter. She got ahead of me on that. So who do I turn to when I need advice on how to raise an arrow and not a boomerang? Because we all want successful children that don't end up living in your basement. I call Michelle. And Hannah is here, and if If you have not met her, she's a treat. She's a delight, and I would encourage you to say hi and meet Michelle's daughter. When I think about character and her strong moral compass, Michelle's goal is like my goal. Every day in my job, I seek to do justice. Every day, that's my goal. Win or lose, my goal is to do justice. I often say with General Helper, we wear two hats because we not only have the role of prosecutor, but we do the role of a defense attorney as well, because if we see something that's not done right or that's unjust, we'll dismiss the case, not only the case. And Michelle, she has that ability. She has a unique ability that's innate in her to do the right thing. She knows the law, she's experienced in the law, and she will be able to apply that strong moral compass that leads her every day in her daily life if she is selected to sit the bench. This county means a lot to me. While I work in Williamson County, I live here. I'm a graduate of MTSU. My parents went to MTSU. So what happens here in this judicial system means a lot to me. And you cannot go wrong if Michelle Blaylock-Hauser is one of your nominees. Thank you for your time.
Thank you both. We are at that point in our proceeding where I would like to invite any of you in the audience who wishes to oppose the selection of any of these nominees to come forward. Seeing none, we will begin with our individual conversations, and we're starting again with Mr. Ward, and I think General Helper is start.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Say, see if I could do this. Just to all the candidates, initially I want to thank all of you for applying and putting yourselves out there, because this is obviously sometimes a challenging and difficult process, but as a member of the commission, I appreciate all of you. Mr. Ward, thank you for coming over and chatting with me. One of the things you talked about early on in your presentation at the start of this session was your work as a police officer. So if you would just share with commission members what qualities or what training you received and learned as an officer that you think would help you if you were selected as the judge.
Well, as a police officer, I was just a street officer. I was the guy who went initially to every call. And in those, you had to, the key to that is to listen. You had to be able to go to each situation and make a decision, and you had to make it quickly, but you had to listen to both sides in order to figure out what to do. And I think as a police officer, that's a difficult quality, because it's a stressful, you're in a stressful situation, but you also have to make a decision. You can't just walk away and say, hey, will y'all wait, I'll come back tomorrow and figure this out. You had to make it right then. And sometimes when you're the first person there, you're the one that makes the decision. Sometimes that alters somebody's life forever. And I think those qualities, to listen and to make a decision, I think helps me in my practice. Also to show that there's two sides to every story. There's not just, okay, you listen to this person and then you make your decision. And I think law is that way. I think law, you have to listen to both sides. And a good example to that is just another lawyer that I started out with at Judge Ash. He didn't work. He came straight from school, and sometimes he'd come in and somebody go, oh my gosh, this is a constitutional violation. They've said this is the entire story, and it's not. I think as a judge, you have to be able to listen to both sides, not just one, before you can make a decision. I think that helped me greatly.
And one of the things you said earlier is that you're a zealous advocate for your clients. How do you transition from being a zealous advocate on behalf of one party to a judicial temperament which would not, at least fairly, allow that zealous advocacy on behalf of one of the parties?
Well, because when you're a judge, and I see judges, I know that they're the judge. They're wearing a robe. They're sitting up above me. There's nothing to prove because you are the judge. And I think that's the difference. When I'm representing a client, I'm there on their behalf, and they're paying for that service. I try to be extremely prepared and to fight for their position. As a judge, I don't have to prove that I'm the judge. I am. So I just have to, I think in my position is just, you just have to change that. And it's not going to happen the very first day if I was selected to walk in and remove that. It will take a minute to say, okay, I don't like what they're doing, or why are they doing it that way? It's not my decision. You present your case your way, good, bad, or ugly, and the other side presents their case and make a decision on the law. And I think that's how you do it.
And one of the things you've just talked about is kind of putting on that robe. What qualities do you think, you've talked about your listening skills, but what other qualities do you think you would bring to the bench if you were given the opportunity to put on that robe?
Well, I think my experience in civil and criminal, because they're vastly different, even though they're intertwined a lot, I think that helps greatly. The fact that basically my practice is half criminal and half civil. And I think those qualities bringing to the bench help in just what I have to do and to make a decision. I think that helps me individually to listen to what people are saying and to know the difference between the civil aspect and the criminal aspect when they intertwine, or whatever I would be doing, whether it's a criminal case or a civil case, in order to get that accomplished.
And you may not have worn a robe at this time, but we talked a little bit about some work you did with the Walking Horse Association. So if you would just share with the commission members what that involved.
Yeah, for about 8 years, I was a judge in the walking horse industry, and they were like mini jury trials. 5 people would sit in there. I was the judge. Ewing Sellers was the prosecutor. And sometimes people, it was kind of funny, would make a point that we rode together. We both lived in Murfreesboro, and so we just rode together up there, but we still were against each other to a degree. But people brought cases. The Horse Show Commission brought cases where horses were sored, where they were abused. And the litigants had attorneys. They presented a case. I ruled on evidentiary things related to the Horse Show Commission, and then the jury decided whether they were innocent or guilty, and they lost their license or got to keep it based on that. And I did that for about 8 years.
And you mentioned just riding with, I guess, someone who might be considered the prosecutor of that. If you're selected as a judge, your status maybe in the legal community changes, and your relationship with attorneys may change. How do you address that in terms of going to lunch, or suddenly, as some of my colleagues have said, you're suddenly the most popular person in the room? How do you address that?
Well, and some may remember this cartoon, and I always relate to that when I tell my friends. I said there was an old cartoon with a sheepdog and a coyote, and they would beat each other up, but when they got off the clock, they would check out and say, "See you tomorrow, Ralph." I can't remember what the other person's name was, and it's that way. And judges that I run into now will go, "Hey, call me by my name when you see me out on the street, because I'm just that person." So, and I get that. You're just a person on the street, but when you get in there, you have a job to do. And it's the same way. It's the same way as a trial lawyer. I have lawyers that I go against, but I don't take it personally when I leave the courtroom. I do when I'm in the courtroom, I'm in there, but I don't take it, there's nothing personal when I leave at the end of the day. I clock out, I'm me, and as a judge, you're the same way. You're just a person that you're friends with, but you have a job to do when you get inside that courtroom. And I think most lawyers, understand that.
And then, again, if you're selected for this position, I guess the best way I would characterize it is, how do you stay humble?
Well, I was born and for a while lived in the public housing in Nashville. I came from a poor background. I've worked my whole life to support myself, and I've always been humble. I'm not the kind that stands out at all. I've always been humble, and I would be humble if I was selected, because I have a job to do, but I'm not going to sit up there and act like I'm better than anybody else, and I never have been that way.
And talk a little bit about jury trial experience, because as a judge presiding over jury trials likely will be at least a good chunk of your docket. So what kind of experience do you have, and how do you approach a jury trial?
Well, I've had some civil trials, more, and I've had criminal jury trials. The criminal jury trials somehow seem to last the longest. And they're stressful because I've had them last up to 7 days, and to me, that's the longest I've ever had. It was very stressful. Every night, I'm going home, reliving what I did. Did I do it right? Did I not do it right? I got to be ready for tomorrow. And but I enjoy it. But it's still, to this day, I think I said earlier, 27 years, I still get stressed about whether it's a jury or non-jury case. But I think that's because I care about it. It's still, I over-prepare and over-analyze. But in jury trials, there's so many moving parts that you have to be prepared for. And the 7-day trials, the best thing I like about it is when it's over. It feels good when it's done. And whether you win or lose, the fact that I'm prepared, I think, means a lot to the clients. And I think in jury trials, as a judge, you have to manage all those. There's a lot of parts that you have to manage. The jurors, the lawyers, the witnesses, and you just have to be prepared for that. And I think preparation on any of that is the key.
And one of the trials you mentioned in your application was a 36-year-old cold case murder trial. Just tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, it was probably the most challenging case I've had because the detective had passed away, the evidence was gone, and there were about 80 witnesses identified by the state that were probable witnesses. So, and I had experts involved. It was one of the most, if not the most challenging case I've had in my 27 years. It was a difficult case, and I had a co-counsel with me, fortunately, and I think that helped a lot. But it was a challenging case just from the number of witnesses and the legal aspects of the law that came up all the time, every day. And it was a 4-year ordeal to get to that point.
If you were selected for this judgeship, share with us what your normal day would look like. Well,
I'm an early riser. I like to get up at 4 a.m. just because it's quiet, and I like to get to the office early. And it's not because I'm in there recreating the earth. It's just it gets me time to get ready for what I'm going to do. And I like to do that, whether I'll do that every day or not, but I like to get the day early. I'm a hard worker. I've always worked. And I can dare say in 27 years, I've never not gone to a court or a case because I was sick. I may not have felt good, but I did it and then went home. And I think as a judge, I think my position and my job is to get the docket moving and get it done and move on to the next day. You know, you only have so many hours in the day, and I get that. And lawyers don't want to work, and most people don't want to go past 4:30 because that's where everybody leaves. And I get that. But I would be prepared to get there and get ready for that day and be prepared when the cases came before me.
And based on your experiences in this judicial district, what changes, if any, would you make in terms of how the courts operate?
Most of my practice is here. When I was younger, I went anywhere that somebody would hire me, but I basically don't go too much out of Rutherford County now. But our system really works pretty good here. The judges do a good job of making the dockets move. Some judges like phone conferences and some don't. I'm a believer in it because sometimes when you have minor things, it gets things done when you're sitting in a pair of shorts and a t-shirt in your office because you didn't have any clients that day, and you can do stuff over the phone. And I'm a big believer in that for judges to do that just to to keep things moving. And but the system here works good. We have a lot of cases, and that's probably everywhere. But I think the key to it is be there, be available, even if it's by phone, and to keep things moving.
And I guess my final, couple of final questions, actually. You ran for district attorney in 2014. If you were selected for this judgeship, would you run for election? I guess it would be in 2020.
Yes. It was a challenging experience if you've never done that because I gained over 10 pounds eating pancakes and country ham every single weekend because that's what you have to do when you run for election. But I would run.
And what did you learn from that campaign that you think you would carry with you to a judicial campaign?
That you have to meet people. People like for you to meet them face to face because there's so many people that run. And the thing that I've learned is most people don't interact with the judicial system at all. They really don't. I do what I do in my circle, but the vast majority of people, I think you have to go and talk to them. And it's unusual when you knock on somebody's door and you go, hey, I'm running for something, I'd like to take a minute, and some people go, nah, no thanks, I'm not interested, and just shut the door. But you know what? That people want to meet you. The people that do sit and talk to you, I don't think they forget it. They go, wow, he took the time at 6:30 in the afternoon on a Saturday to knock on my door and tell me why he's running. I think that's important to do, that I would do.
And now my final question for you before I ask my colleagues to speak with you. What do you like to do in your spare time? What should we know about you when you're not practicing law?
Well, my wife who's here with me, and I hope you don't ask me what team, but we are football fanatics.
What team?
I wasn't going to mention it.
I know. Do you want me to tell you? Okay. Alabama. And I know. You're.
There's a good reason. He's got a couple of daughters that go to
I have two daughters that have gone to the University of Alabama. I was not an Alabama fan until I started paying their tuition, and that did help me become a fan. But not because of that. It's because I got to spend time with my two daughters. My two daughters would say, hey, Dad, Mom, y'all come down and watch a football game. Of course, I want to be with my kids, and as they get older, they don't want me as much. But so that really meant a lot to me and my wife to go and be with our kids for football games. And I like to run. I took a break off from running, and I started running again, and I really like that. But it gets harder as the older I get. More joints hurt when I hit the pavement, but I do like doing that. And we've renovated a house, an older house, and we've really enjoyed that.
And Mr. Chairman, with that, I have no further questions.
Thank you. Mr. Golden, do you want to?
There you go.
High tech.
Yeah, after all that buildup. Thank you for being here. I don't have questions, Tom.
Okay, sorry about that. And actually, I don't have any questions. That may come as a shock to some of the members of this.
First.
Yes, it is. Oh, it was absolutely.
General Helper did a great job.
Yes, she did.
I've had a bunch of cases with
Thank you, Mr. McCarr.
Morning, Mr. Ward.
Morning.
You say in your application, if I were fortunate enough to be selected, I would attempt to resolve cases by trial or settlement as quickly as possible. And you mentioned earlier the phone conferences. Is there anything else specifically that you would do to perhaps resolve a backlog of cases or move these cases to trial more quickly?
Well, lawyers, and I get it because I do it too sometimes, tend to want to continue things forever. And I understand that continuances are a necessity because all things happen, but there has to be an end to that, to where you make the cases move. And if somebody has a good reason, yes. If they don't, then you got to move through them and get them tried. And a lot of times, just doing that I have seen, it makes two lawyers get together, talk, and work the case out. If they get pushed to do that. And our judges are pretty good about doing that and following along in those same lines and being available during the day for phone conferences, I think is a real good key to make things move.
How would you specifically facilitate the lawyers getting together?
Phones. When I first started, people didn't have cell phones, and now every lawyer I know has one cell phone, and you can get in touch with a lawyer whether they're on the lake, in the mountains, or in the bathroom. So you can get in touch with them to make things move.
Is there a backlog of cases in these two counties, Rutherford and County?
I don't know if there's a backlog. I know there are a lot of cases. But I think that's probably in any county that's growing in this state, that there are cases that get the more people that move in, the more divorces you have, the more arrests you have, the more car wrecks you have. So there's just more of it. I know that. Whether there's a backlog, I could not tell you.
That's all. Thank you, sir.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Good morning, Mr.
Morning.
Ward. I have just a quick question for you.
Yes.
General Helper was asking you about temperament and those sorts of things, and you were talking about, running into attorneys on the street. And I understand that. Practicing in Knoxville, I've always said the legal community is like a small community within a larger one, and I suspect it's that way most places.
Yes.
But if you're selected as a judge, you have to make sure everyone views you as being fair and impartial, correct? So how do you handle that? I mean, you've known, Mr. McCarter talked about the fact he's had cases with a lot of the attorneys that are coming before us today. So how do you handle that as judge to make sure that, no one thinks, well, attorney so-and-so is getting a better treatment or more fair rulings or whatever because of a friendship with?
Right. I think you can't go too far with that as far as, I mean, you're friendly to them on the street, but I think if you're going vacations with them or, you're doing things like that, I think that's different. I think if you just can't do that. I just think, because I think that does have the appearance that you're going to favor them because, you're going to the beach with them and their family. So you got to say, you can't come before me if we're going to the beach together. I think things like that, but seeing them pass on the street when you're, on the street, hey, hi, how's your family? Great, how's yours? Things like that. I think I would not want to stop that because I want to be able to be approachable. I don't want to be, in our new courthouse, the judges are all, and it wasn't that way before, so it's different. They're all secure. You can't walk in and just say hi. Or can I get a cup of coffee? You have to push a button, they see you on the camera, somebody let you, who is that? And you have to duck down, it's me. So I want to be approachable.
Thank you. I don't have anything further.
Yes.
Have any questions? I thank you for your application. I just want to say, go Vols.
Thank you. All right, thank you. Yes, sir.
You're almost done.
Okay.
I just really have one question, one comment.
Yes,
and we've alluded to, the challenge of being elected to the post, and we've talked about staying grounded. And it seems to me that one of the ways judges can stay grounded is to stay involved in the civic affairs of their community, whether it's Rotary clubs or church or other community projects. What's your attitude or idea about the role that you can play as the judges to be seen every day, not just at election time, but seen every day, and let people experience you and know where you're coming from and how you work?
Well, I think you have to be out in the community, because if people don't want to see you that you sit in an ivory tower and never interact with them like a king would. I think they want to see you out in public and go, wow, that judge, he's a normal person. He's one, he's approachable. I can come say hi to him. He doesn't hide behind a door. I think you have to be that way. You have to be out in the community doing things so they know who you are. And in that way, if they do ever interact with the system, they go, okay, he's just a normal person. He's not something different than me. And I think that's very important.
Well, and then finally, let me just ease your mind about Alabama. Even though I am married to a War Eagle, it doesn't affect my judgment. And you have a sophomore quarterback who's from my hometown, so
he is.
I'm rooting for you. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much.
Mr. Scarlett?
All right, thank you. Thank you for being here this morning, and this is the only time I'll say this, just to avoid the repetition. Thank you for all the applicants for being here. For this process to work, we need great applicants to come and do what you're doing today. So thank you, Mr. Scarlett.
Thank you.
So in your opening, you talked about, I picked up a theme of experience, wisdom, and temperament, and I think that's a great way to frame probably most of the questions you and the other candidates will hear today, so I'll just jump right in. As far as experience, could you give us a little more color? You referenced that you've done jury trials. Could you give us a little more color on just how many?
I've never kept score. I did probably for the first year or so when I was trying cases because they were still new and exciting. But over 30 years, I somehow quit keeping score. My estimation is somewhere more than 30, but less than 50. And that would be primarily in Middle Tennessee. I did try one in Alabama. And I've had one or two in federal court also. Okay.
Temperament-wise, you would hope that all judges on a great day will have, will do it right. But some of what we're trying to suss out is what are people like on a bad day, and what's the probability of bringing that into the courtroom? So how would people close to you describe you on a bad day?
it's probably going to depend on what the bad was. If it's an immediate thing, like I dropped a hammer on my toe, I'm probably going to be loud. If it's if somebody said something that hurt my feelings, I'm probably going to withdraw and be quiet. So thankfully, I don't have too many bad days. I try to leave my work at the office so that when I go home, I don't bring it there. But I don't think I really have that many bad days. But if I do, I'm probably going to be a lot less conversational with you.
Okay. So over 30 years, you've appeared in front of a lot of judges.
I have.
And without naming names, well, I mean, you can name them if you'd like, but what are some of the attributes? Okay, don't name one.
He and I have not always seen eye to eye when he was on the Court of Appeals.
Go ahead. We enjoy that.
What are some of the attributes you'd want to emulate, and what are some that you definitely would like to avoid, based on what you've seen on the bench?
What I want to avoid, and I don't think I'll have any difficulty doing this because I'm not really that way anyway, is bringing a sense of arrogance, or you need to bow down to me and I'm the one in control of this situation. Everybody knows that. You're wearing the robe. We know you're in control. And there's no sense making this job difficult. You can be courteous and you can be polite, and things work out a lot better. I had this experience with a young lawyer in an office I worked in. His office was next to mine, and I heard him call his secretary on the phone, and he said, "Come down here." And when he got through, I kind of went into him and said, "You know, you can do that, and she's going to come down there. That's her job, and she's going to do the task you assigned to her. But you could say, hey, could you come down here a minute, please?" She's still going to come down there. She's still going to perform the task, but she feels a lot better about it. And it's not that difficult to be kind. We had Keith Siskin here. I don't think he was mean to anybody. I don't think you could find anybody who would say, Keith Siskin really treated me badly. And I say kind, there's a difference being polite and courteous and being kind. I really think he was a kind person. Mr. McCarter and I one time, we're both competitive, and we had a hearing or trial in front of Judge Siskin. This is when he was in juvenile court. I'm going to start with Mr. McCarter. He got a little bit loud talking over me. Well, I wasn't going to have any of that, so I got a little bit louder talking over him. This thing kind of seesawed. We probably both knew, all right, this needs to stop. And Judge Siskin just said, "Okay, guys, we're going to take about a 5-minute break." And he stepped off the bench. And then we get along fine, so it wasn't a problem between Mr. McCarter and I, but that was a good way to handle it. And that's the type of judge I would want to be. I don't want to make it difficult.
So, I mean, that's a great way to be, and maybe there's people who don't try, and maybe there's those that do, but over time, you go to enough parties and, you know, you're the smartest person in the room, you're the funniest all of a sudden, so you go from being who you are to maybe somebody else just because everyone's always focused on you wherever you go. So how do you stay grounded in the middle of all that so you don't become a judge you don't want to be?
I'm the smartest one in the room. Everybody else left. So I wouldn't have anybody to talk to. You know, my upbringing, my parents taught us from very early age, and I have 2 brothers, you treat everybody else with respect, and they applied the golden rule to us. No pun intended. You know, treat others how you would want them to treat you. And that was instilled in us from a very early age. They're here. My parents are here with my wife. And I've got 2 brothers. I don't think any of us are that way. None of us are uppity, so to speak.
So you're saying your brothers and your wife and your parents will keep you grounded regardless of what robe you may be wearing?
I think my parents have already done that job. I can tell you my wife will. If I start getting out of line, she's going to stop that pretty quickly. I really don't see me developing an ego over that, quite frankly. When I practiced law at the firm for 20 years, I came over and I started working with Ben Bennett, and he'd been practicing 5 years. I'd been out 25 years. And we called it Bennett and Scarlett. It was important to him to have his name there, and it wasn't that important to me. I didn't have that ego. After Ben was appointed to the General Sessions bench, Kurt Catron started working with me. He's been practicing a lot less years than I have. And he's far more technologically oriented than I am, and his wife works for a magazine, so she's got all this artistic ability. So I said, well, come up with a proposed letterhead. He brought in, it was Catherine and Scarlett. Okay. I just don't have that ego, respectfully.
So as a judge, you'll probably get a lot fewer invitations to go over to people's houses for dinner, or you won't accept them. And yet, you're going to be at everybody's dinner, probably every night that you touch. You just won't be there. They'll just be talking about you. What do you hope they say about you?
That he's fair. I had somebody come to hire me one time, and he said, you know, you represented my friend's wife, and my friend told me to come hire you. And I said, well, what's he like? And the guy said, my friend told me he's tough, but he's fair. And you know, I could accept that. I don't need to be the bulldog or, you know, the mean guy who's going to get up and scream and shout. That doesn't help things most of the time. That he was fair, that he was courteous, and that he listened. I found that if people feel like they were heard, even an adverse result can be okay with them. I think when we started having all these Penn-Daddy-Lottie hearings here in domestic cases, and you had cases really where it was pretty clear which parent ought to be the primary residential parent, but the other side wanted to be heard. They didn't want to feel like they were giving up on their kids or have it held that way. And you'd have the Penn-Daddy-Lottie hearing, and they felt better, even if it wasn't their way, because they were heard and they were treated courteously.
Your application, you note that you've been appointed a special judge in General Sessions Court and Juvenile Court. Could you give us a little more color on that and what that experience might translate to this job?
I can. I've done that in Cannon County when the judge up there was out. Then there's a General Sessions judge who serves as juvenile judge also in Cannon County. So I did that for about a week. She has the General Sessions criminal docket, the General Sessions civil docket, and the juvenile docket. You learn a lot about that. That job is not from 9 to 5. I got a call at 2 o'clock in the morning. They picked a juvenile up out of Cannon County who was down here in Rutherford County in detention. And what do we do? And what are you going to do about it? They're talking to me. So I learned a good bit from that. I did it here in General Sessions criminal. And then years ago, there was 2 lawyers who, I don't know why, but they asked me to be the judge. So I said, okay, they appointed me as judge. It was a civil case. What I learned from that is it's a lot easier to get out there and pick a position and advocate it than sometimes it is to decide between 2 well-advocated positions. It's a different view, and it can be a daunting task sometimes. But that's what you've got to do. You've got to decide.
What changes would you make to the court, if any, if you get this job?
You know, I'm going to agree with Mr. Ward. The court system here works pretty well. You can usually get a trial date within about 3 months. You know, if clients had their way, we could get a trial tomorrow. But then we'd have a lot of inefficiencies going on. We'd have judges that are sitting around twiddling their thumbs. So you have to have some kind of backlog, so to speak, there to make it its most efficient. I think the judges do a good job here moving the cases. They used to have a docket call system where you would come to court once a year and they'd call the old cases, and I would see some of the judges set cases that clearly weren't ready to be tried. For example, a workers' comp case, when the employee had not been released from the treating physician, he'd say, well, let's go ahead and set this case. And my frustration was I hadn't had mine called yet. You just took a trial date for a case that's not going to go that I would have loved to have had. So I don't think you set cases that aren't ready.
So as General Helper mentioned earlier, you know, if you are selected, you may be running a campaign. What are your thoughts around running a campaign, and are you campaign ready? Can you get there?
Prefer not to, but if I have to, I can. I've got the money allocated to do that. Been here a long time, been here 30 years, know a lot of people, and don't think I'd have a difficulty putting that together. Actually, when I've seen other people run these campaigns, my thought was, why don't you start with your clients? You already have a relationship with these people. You know these people. Hopefully, a good percentage of them like you still. Why don't you start with your clients? I know Barry spoke for me up here. he called me when we had the road superintendent position opened up. He said, "Hey, Darrell, if you hadn't got somebody else you like, I'm going to tell you this guy's running for road superintendent." He won, by the way. "I've known him for a long time. I'd appreciate it if you'd vote for him." Well, that told me a lot. And I think your clients could do that. And to me, that's a good place to start. I agree with Mr. Ward. You got to get out and meet people. Yeah, you're just going to have to work. The difficulty is you still got to do your day job, and then you got to do this on nights and weekends. But that's what it's got to be.
So last question, a lot of questions around, well, two. One, why do you want to be a judge?
You know, for a long time I didn't. I was enjoying the money and the things that allowed me to do, and I didn't really have any interest in being a judge. But as I've gotten older and I've been in front of more and more judges, and I'm going to pick Franklin, for example. You go down there, Jim Martin, brilliant guy. I don't know how many of you know him. Brilliant guy. No telling what that guy was making. But he gave it up to sit on the bench. Mike Binkley, great guy. I know he had a very successful practice. And I had cases with both these people. He gave it up to sit on the bench. At some point, you got to give back. Rutherford County, Cannon County, and the practice of law have all been good to me. It's time for me to give back and do my part like these other judges have done. To me, the best judges are the ones who have had the experience, who have been in the trenches, know what it's like, and remember it. Don't forget being there, and then get up there and share that experience and their wisdom with others.
And then one last one. It's great to have the right experience, the right temperament, the right wisdom taking the bench, but you're still a human, and it's also helpful for us to know what kind of human you are. And so a question there, if you woke up Saturday and you looked at your calendar and there was nothing on it, there's nothing you had to do, what's a day like? What do you do on a day? And I know this is hypothetical. What's a day like on a day where you don't have to do anything?
My wife doesn't let me have very many of those. She creates lists of things to be done. So I have to assume.
But we're going to assume
the list is done.
Right.
Yeah, we spend a lot of time every spring doing gardening and getting the backyard looking pretty. It's kind of my oasis. And I will go back out there on the porch, and we do this even at night. And we just sit there and we just talk to each other and enjoy the backyard. Got a couple cats running around, hummingbirds this time of year. I enjoy doing that. If it's the right time of year, I might call Barry and see if we can go quail hunting. If it's winter, I probably don't want to get outside too much, depending on how cold it is. I would probably relax, but I can't do that for too many days. I get bored. I had a sports car that was not very good in the snow and ice. And we had ice here several years ago, and I couldn't get out of my house. And this was before I was married. And I finally, about the third day of that, sitting around, played every game I had, watched every TV show to watch, I called my parents who had better vehicles, and I said, "Can y'all come get me, take me somewhere? I'm just bored." But I can do it for a day. Might do it for 2, 3 stuff.
I appreciate the opportunity to visit with you when you came to visit last week, and I appreciate your being here today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, no other questions.
It's refreshing sometimes to come to Murfreesboro. I mean, and I'm going to compliment you. You're genuine.
Thank you.
And Mr. Ward, don't think because I didn't say something to you that you're not genuine either, but it's just, you come out of Nashville and you come down here and it's kind of refreshing. But how, and we had a lot of this yesterday when we were in Williamson County, and you mentioning some of the judges over there, how do you see your interaction with Cannon County now that you're in the big city of Murfreesboro? I mean, with all due respect to my friend Mr. North, Commissioner North, and his fine county in Hamilton, now that Rutherford's bigger.
Just recently.
Just recently, and I went to MTSU, so obviously I like this part of the world too. So how do you relate to them? Because you are the 800-pound gorillas up here.
You know, we don't have the same issues y'all were facing yesterday, and I'm thankful for that. The judges here, they all go up to Cannon County, and they're scheduled to go up, I believe, last time I looked at it, once a week. A circuit or the chancery judge is going to be up there in Cannon County. They have their own general sessions, civil, criminal, and their own juvenile. That's not all the time they dedicate. If you go up there and it's that one time a week or one time a month that they're there, and the way they do it actually is one judge has week 1, one has week 2, one has week 3, one has week 4. And I think they go up on Wednesday. If you need to set a trial that's going to take 3 days, they say, okay, well, let's pull the calendar out and find 3 days where we can do this. They don't just say, well, we'll have to do day 1 right here, wait another week, do day 2, wait another week, do day 3. So I do not think they are treated as the red-headed stepchild, as it, with all due respect, kind of sound like they perhaps were yesterday, some of the smaller counties. They don't have the volume, but the judges and the lawyers don't mind going up there. It's a nice drive. Why anybody wants to complain about having a 30-minute respite from their day and driving up there is beyond me. I enjoy it.
Good answer. I've got no further questions.
If you didn't tell the story, I have a different take on that.
You think I started it?
No, I'm pretty certain I started. But what I remember about that and what I think is important for the commissioners to know about you, Mr. Scarlett, is that I got loud, you got louder, I got louder, you got louder. Judge Siskin said, well, first, the court officer came over from the other courtroom and said what's going on with their hand on the gun. And Judge Siskin did what he did. But the way we responded out in the hallways, what's important is that it was over. And that's what I wanted to share with the commission about you, is that you don't hold grudges. You were fighting in there, I was fighting in there. But when we took the 5-minute break, rather than go out there and get sideways with each other, it was more like, that was pretty fun.
We were shaking hands, patting each other on the back. Thank you.
I just have one question, help me better understand. The position that has become available, to your understanding, will it be a mix of criminal and civil, or what's your belief as to?
My understanding is it will be civil, and the current presiding judge will start picking up some criminal. And I got that from the current presiding judge, so I think it's probably pretty good. Thank you.
Good morning, Mr. Scarlett.
Morning.
As a civil trial attorney, you bring up a good point. It's not unusual in Hamilton County and other counties to have a multi-day trial where you try it one day and then you come back 2 weeks later and then you come back 3 weeks later, or so on. And that's absolutely unfair to the litigants. What would you do to ensure that that rarely, if ever, happens?
I would try not to set those cases so that we had to do that. I've had it happen on the front end. Well, we'll give you the 23rd, then we can come back on the 7th, the 27th, and then the 31st. If you had to delay it another month to get all those court dates together and do it, I think that's the better way to do it. It's really unfair to the litigants, the lawyers, and quite frankly, the judge, because when I go back for day 2 or day 3, I'm sitting there wondering, how much does the judge remember about this? Because he's had maybe 100 cases between now and then, and sometimes, as you know from doing these things, it's the fine points that make a difference, and they can get lost if you have that delay.
You're the owner, as you indicate on your application, of a shooting range and a gun store.
Yes, sir.
Continue to own that if you became judge?
I've looked at the rules. As I understand it, since it's closely held, I probably could. I would confer, though, they have something similar where you can call a board of professional responsibility, ask them a question, ask them, and if they say you can't, then I won't. It doesn't generate litigation, which is kind of in the judicial ethics rules. We've never sued anybody. We've never been sued. If that became a problem, I'd have to shed my interest. But if I got the position, one of my first calls would be, hey, tell me what I need to do about this.
Thank you, sir.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Scarlett, I enjoyed your application. I don't have any questions for you, but I do appreciate you coming before us today.
Thank you.
Mr. Scarlett, I got several calls singing your praises, and it was nice to receive those. The commissioners don't say it, but right before these hearings, we can become pretty popular, and a lot of nice things said about you, and I don't have any other questions.
Thank you.
When you were at Sanford, did you have the good fortune of taking any classes with John Carroll?
I'm sorry, Mr. McCarter coughed. And I couldn't hear it.
There you go again. No, I was just asking you, during your law school days, were you lucky enough to have any classes with John Carroll?
He came after I graduated. I graduated in '88.
I guess he came in yeah. And really, I just have two questions. The first is accessibility. It seems that there's sometimes a concern that you can't find a judge when you need them. How would you define your workday? Are you going to be available if emerging issues come up where lawyers are going to need you, or if you're working a criminal docket, if you need warrants signed, or is that going to all be done in general sessions, or how does all that work?
Well, you got to be there. It's not a part-time job, it is a full-time job. And as I said before, my experience from having done it previously is it's not 8 to 5. So yes, you have to be accessible. I know they'll wake you up in the middle of the night if the police need a warrant. I don't think I'm the closest one to the police department, so maybe that wouldn't happen too often, but if it does, you just got to do it. That's part of it.
Go so far as to allow the right people to have your cell phone number or just your home number?
Well, they're the same. I don't have a landline, so the people who needed the cell number would have it.
And this is not a reflection at all on the Rutherford County, Cannon County Bar, but there are some lawyers that part of the tactics is they want to push the judge's buttons. If somebody's trying to push your buttons, what buttons would you think they're going to go after?
One, I don't know why you would want to push the judge's button, because he's the one in control of this and making the decisions. But
you want to make them make a mistake.
Well, I'd rather win than make a mistake. But if they try to do that, I think you have the obligation to remain calm, to not fall into that trap, to recognize it. If it's starting to work, you're wearing the robe. Take a 5-minute break.
It seems like that 5-minute break's a good idea in a whole lot of different contexts.
It has a lot of effect.
It does. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
We are going to take a 5-minute recess, and so that means we'll be back at about 25 of 11. If we may, let's go back in session, and Mr. Moffitt, we're ready for you to come forward, and Ms. Nelms is going to, I believe, begin the questioning.
Good morning.
Good morning, Mr. Moffitt. How are you doing today?
Great, thank you. How are you?
I'm doing well, thank you. It was nice speaking with you recently. It was nice meeting you face-to-face today to put a face with a name. You have laid out in your application your work history, and by all appearances have quite a bit of trial practice under your belt with the type of work that you've done, but that's been primarily in either, I think it's healthcare liability now, I still call it medical malpractice, I date myself, but, and in general, tort defense of various areas. As you've heard, this position may very well, I'm not sure if it's going to handle criminal or not, but it's probably going to handle quite a bit of domestic relations. How are you going to be prepared to handle that if you're chosen for this position?
Yes, thank you. I think that's a great question. As I tried to demonstrate in my opening is I have a lot of experience in learning new areas of law, and that's one of the things I really enjoy doing is going out and learning and experiencing new things. I know from my experience in circuit court as a clerk for Judge Stotts down in Shelby County that you have your docket and you have the motions on file, and you have an opportunity to prepare for those every week. And so I think preparation is a big part of that. But then just becoming fluent and learning the area of law and being prepared is going to go a long ways.
You've described that you've handled cases basically all across the state, or essentially across the state, and now into Georgia. That's put you before a lot of different trial judges. What are some of the things that you've learned that you would want to emulate? And on the flip side, what are some of the things you've seen that you want to make sure you do not do if you're chosen?
Absolutely. I have had an opportunity to travel all over the state and see a lot of things that I think are effective and things that I see as less effective. I think it just comes down to answer both questions, good and the bad. It's being on time, it's being prompt, it's treating people with respect, and it's being prepared. There's nothing more frustrating, I think, for an attorney to get before a judge and realize that they haven't had the time to read their motion or be prepared. And so I think treating the litigants, treating the attorneys with the respect, and largely that's just being prepared and being knowledgeable about the issues before the court.
And maybe somewhat in that same vein, what character trait, if any, do you have that you think would maybe be a stumbling block, if there is one, to you being an effective judge?
Well, that's a tough question. If anything, I might, especially with pro se litigants or something, probably give them a little bit too much leniency as far as giving them time to, want to make sure that they feel like they have an opportunity to be heard. So that might be a weakness, I would say.
One of the things that you and I discussed, and I want you to share with my fellow commissioners, is I asked you why this position, why now? And you shared with me, and you put some of this in your application about the experience your wife and you had as foster parents. And I'd like for you to share that with the commission, how that impacted your decision to apply for this position.
Absolutely. In my years of practice as an attorney, I've been in front of countless judges on very important issues for my clients, but can't really think of a time I've been in front of a judge for an issue that was personally important for me. And so several months ago, we received a phone call, and we were asked if we would take in a couple of girls that had been severely abused and that were going through the process here. And we weren't foster parents. We did some other type of, I believe it was called a kinship program. And so we were the temporary guardians for these young girls, and we had an opportunity to bring them in. And one of them had a couple of broken bones and brain bleeds, and they were severely delayed. And so we had an opportunity to really help them progress and help them grow just fundamentally. And so as we went to court and we had to sit on a back row, and I couldn't participate, which was something I wasn't used to when I'm in court. I can't make my arguments or make my statements, and I'm very divorced from the situation. It really impressed upon me the importance of having good judges, more so than it had ever before in my life. And so I saw the importance of having good people, knowledgeable people, and people that'll listen to the issues and hone in on the issues and make good, sound judgments.
What makes you a better choice than the other applicants that are before us today?
I think one thing that sets me apart, and I mentioned this briefly, is I'm local, but I'm not a local guy. I'm not a part of the bar here. My practice is just not one that really encourages me to be a part of any local bar. The last jury trial I had a few months ago was out in Mr. Box's area in Madison County. I'll be trying a case Monday morning up in Knox County in your area. And so I'm everywhere. And so I don't come in with prejudices against anyone, or I don't have an appearance of impropriety as far as being friends with someone else that's going to be before me on the bench. And so I think I bring that to the table.
And maybe somewhat in that same vein, if you're chosen, are you going to run for election?
Absolutely. I would, absolutely.
How would you conduct a campaign lacking maybe some of those local connections like some of the other applicants would have?
Yeah, and I've already started looking into that as far as funding, and I believe maybe Mr. Warden mentioned that so many people in the community, they aren't frequently in front of the court. I know I'm not. And so a lot of the people that are actually casting votes and deciding who those attorneys are, or who those judges are, rather, I think it really comes down to name recognition. So I would work to get my name out and meet more people. And, in life, most of your solutions to problems or situations in front of you is work. And so that's one thing I would do, is put in a lot of work.
What would a typical day look like in Judge Moffitt's courtroom?
Well, I thought about that. My first day coming in, what I anticipate doing is getting the docket that's been assigned to me and looking at those older cases and setting up status conferences with those to find out what's been causing this to drag on and what do we need to do to get these cases resolved. And there may be some very real practical reasons of why cases are still lingering, but I also know that attorneys always have a case or two that they just hate and that they want to avoid. And we need to set deadlines to get those things moving. And other than that, I'll be preparing for motion hearings or trials and doing research on the topics that'll be before me so that I can make good, sound decisions, because the law is constantly changing. Even if you think you know it now, new decisions come out virtually every day.
Would you see yourself making suggestions for significant changes to the way things are currently being done by the current judges that are sitting?
No, I would not. I am very impressed with the court here in Rutherford County. If it was a house fire, I don't think I'd be interested in coming into it, frankly. But it seems like it's in great shape. Primarily, all the courts I'm in around the state, I think, are run very well and very efficiently. There are things I would do differently, but I really like the way that they do things here in Rutherford County. They allow you to set your own motions. I'm a big believer that attorneys are primarily the ones who need to move their cases. And from time to time, courts need to step in and set some deadlines and things. But primarily, most attorneys, are very professional, and they all have the same end goal. And so as long as you don't get in their way, I think most of the time things will get done and work out the way that they should.
One of the questions that Commissioner Golden often asks, and I always enjoy hearing the answer to, is if you become judge, you're suddenly going to become the funniest person in the room. Your jokes are going to be funny. You're going to be more popular, etc. How do you keep yourself grounded?
Yeah, and I'd like to think that I just don't have the personality for that. And maybe my wife might say differently. But as I mentioned in the opening, I'm from a small town. I grew up on a farm. I didn't really have any desire to be the funniest guy in the room, the smartest guy in the room. I just want to do my work, do my job, do it the best I can. I have a lot of passion in doing a good job. And I want to do that and go home and live my life and be with my family.
Thank you. I have no further questions.
Mr. Moffitt, when you worked in the Sigmund firm, who was your mentor there?
I had two, Teresa Sigmund and Catherine Anderson. And Teresa is retired, and Kay has gone on, and the firm that I went with, the group I went into that firm with has left and gone to the firm of Baker Donaldson now.
How about at the Hardison firm?
I was primarily working with Kay. I worked with Tim some and Jerry Potter. I still go down and use Jerry Potter as a mediator on some of my cases in Memphis, and I work some with David Cook, and I've run into him periodically at court. I think he's some type of judge down in General Sessions now. When I left, he told me I was a good one, and he wished I was sticking around, and he gave me one of his books, and he signed it, and we've stayed in good touch. I said I use him as a mediator, and it's always a pleasure to see him, and I anticipate he would give me a good recommendation if I asked him to, or if you asked him without me asking.
That's all I have. Thank you.
No questions. Thank you, Mr. Moffitt, for participating in this process.
Thank you.
Yeah, well, first and foremost, you always have to follow the law. I can't think of a way to lose the respect of the bar quicker as a judge than to not follow the law and do something based upon emotions. I always like the saying that a bad set of facts is typically bad, can lead to bad law. And I'm a big believer in that. And as Attorneys, judges, we don't make the facts, we just follow the law. And I think that's the key to that.
And one other question, you talked a little bit about letting lawyers kind of set their own schedules or do their jobs, I guess would be a way to look at it. From a criminal perspective, in Williamson County or in the 21st Judicial District, our courts have set forth scheduling orders. You must do this by this date, do this by that date. And inevitably, none of those dates are ever met. Things are constantly reset. As a judge, at what point do you recognize that there's a lot of delays going on contrary to what the court orders? I mean, what is your role in that, and how do you step in to address that?
Yeah, and I'm a big fan of scheduling orders. As an associate with Ms. Sigmund, we lived and died by scheduling orders, and we didn't miss deadlines. And, you know, the key to that is set forth in the Rules of Civil Procedure for good cause shown, is that it's on a case-by-case basis, but you've got to have a good cause. And if you continually have a good cause, then we need to find out what's really dragging this thing down so that we can get it to resolution. Because I'm a big believer that most litigants, most attorneys, what they ultimately want is a resolution of their issues.
Mr. Moffitt, when I go to other jurisdictions, I like to really kind of find out what kind of person we're dealing with, or what they do, or lady, that sort of thing. Because I don't know you, I want to ask a question. I met you out in front of the courthouse before you came in, had a pleasant conversation, and I like that. But one thing I want to know, I want to share with the commission a little bit about you. So if you and I were going out playing, presumably you're a golfer, it's okay, but let's pretend you are. If we're going out and we're going to play 18 holes and we're going to ride together for 4 hours, what are we likely to talk about? What am I going to find out about you as a person, your likes, your dislikes, things of that nature?
Sure. So I live here north of Murfreesboro, and as I mentioned, I grew up on a farm. And so for whatever reason, I have chosen my hobby to be manual labor. And so, you know, I have a little farm. I have cows, horses, and various other things. And I enjoy to work. I enjoy working with my family, out cleaning up the place, trying to make it look good. Other than that, you know, I'm just a normal guy. I don't watch as much sports as I used to. I don't seem to have time for it. I'm not an Alabama fan, I'll point that out. But, you know, I enjoy I think I'm a lot like anybody else.
Obviously, you drive in your trial, you drive across the state, and all that. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
I keep forgetting. Mr. Moffitt, I noticed that you have practiced over in West Tennessee, the Memphis area and around in the western section, and you seem to have carried the same good qualities of the practice that I've discovered in my time in western section over to here, and I've enjoyed listening to you today. I also want to compliment you on being the second person that I recall that went to Brigham Young. And the other one happens to be sitting next to me, but I just want to compliment you on that. There aren't that many Brigham Young folks over here, and kind of like that. So that being said, mine's more of, I haven't met you before. I've enjoyed listening to you. I like your demeanor. It seems like you have the demeanor that would be something I wouldn't mind coming from the big city over here to the sort of big city. And I have no further questions for you, but just I didn't want you to think that I was ignoring you.
Thank you, I
Any more than I wanted
appreciate
to have Mr. Ward think I was ignoring him too. So
BYU is one of the best kept secrets in the country. I think it's a great school.
No. I saved that for other folks yesterday over in Williamson.
So for Commissioner Lawless's benefit, I'll just point out it's a lot easier to be a BYU fan than an Alabama fan. If you're an Alabama fan, you lose one game, your life's over. BYU fan, you can lose half your games and it's still a good Saturday. So out of necessity. Thank you for being here today. I don't have questions.
Mr. Moffett, I have one question for you. And you've been in a lot of different courthouses, and you know there are written rules and unwritten rules. Part of the challenge that we all have when we're litigators is we want to know what the unwritten rules are. What would people say the unwritten rules in your court are going to be?
You know, I think the biggest issue, the biggest thing I would take issue with and require to be a rule is utmost professionalism in the courtroom. I mentioned to Ms. Nelms when I clerked for Judge Stotts that there was a family domestic issue in front of her. And one of the attorneys kept referring to the wife as that woman. And it really shocked me that that was permitted to go on for a while. And on the break, I mentioned it to Judge Stotts that I was surprised he was allowed to say that. And she promptly went out and corrected him. So I think that would be the biggest unwritten rule, would be utmost professionalism.
Thank you so much. Appreciate your coming. Unless there are any other questions, we'll go to the next candidate. Thank you.
Thank you.
Lynch? I believe Mr. North is going to start.
Morning, Mr. Lynch.
Morning, sir.
First, let me say, initially, I had questioned your sanity about you having your ex-wife introduce you. Some of the divorce cases I've had, that could have gone south in a hurry, but I think that went well. It was a good tribute to you. I understand.
You may be waiting another 12.
But I appreciate you coming to Chattanooga to meet with me.
I greatly appreciate
our meeting there. Thank you for doing that. You heard Mr. Scarlett talk about it briefly, but what do you understand this judicial position is going to entail as far as the nature of the judgeship?
Since it is not made public to everyone, it was my understanding that it could be a mix of criminal and civil. But since no one's come right out and say this is exactly what we're doing, I would submit to you that it's probably going to be something more along the lines where the judges are going to find out who you've chosen to submit to the governor, who the governor has chosen, and then let that person, as far as what their qualities are, their capabilities, be put in an appropriate courtroom. One thing that you've heard consistently throughout the candidates is that we have a good judiciary here, and they want to maintain a good judiciary. And I do not believe our judges are going to be put in a position to say, you know, I think I'd like to do criminal now. You need to go do something you may not be as familiar with. Or I think I want to take all these domestics now because I can, and you're going to go do something you have no idea what you're doing. I don't see our judges that way. Our judges, I believe, are going to meet, they're going to discuss it, and they're going to put the appropriate judge in the appropriate courtroom.
So the nature of your practice is you've been an assistant district attorney for many years.
Yes, sir.
Practice is exclusively criminal.
Yes,
sir. Would that be a hindrance if you had to deal with a domestic docket, for example? Or?
That is the million-dollar question. I imagine anyone that reviewed my application took out a highlighter right there and said, wait, this guy only does criminal, and he only does prosecution. How in the world could he walk in and do a civil docket? And I'll tell you this, because I am a trial attorney, because I've been in a courtroom, because I know how to research the law. And that research began 20 years ago, over 20 years ago, because I went to a school where I was taught and trained by practicing attorneys, by sitting trial judges, by Court of Appeals judges, and a Supreme Court justice. They taught us from the very beginning how to research the law, to become familiar with our statutes, with our case law, with the rules of evidence, the rules of procedure. And that's continued throughout my practice. I don't go into a courtroom not knowing what the law is, not prepared to present the evidence of the proof, the case law, the statutes to a judge. When you're talking about the distinction between criminal and civil, you're talking about your ability to research the law. I possess that ability. I've had to use it and employ it for every single motion that I've ever prepared and filed before court, every hearing I've conducted, every direct examination, every cross-examination. I had to be aware of those rules of evidence, the rules of procedure. So will it be a challenge? Absolutely. But I guarantee you, there's not a man or woman back there that's not standing up here before you today because we want the challenge. I want it. I want it very much, and I'm ready for it.
citizens of Rutherford and Canning counties are very fortunate to have 7 outstanding applicants for this position. What distinguishes you? Why are you the one that we should, or at least one of the ones that we should nominate and the governor should choose?
Afraid that question was coming because it's like, well, let me talk about me, yay me. But I will tell you this. As a prosecutor, the one thing that I do bring to this is my entire career, my ethical obligation is the pursuit of justice. And what is justice? It's finding out what the truth is. My job and what I do is not about winning. I'm not hired or retained to go in and win a case. I've been appointed by the elected district attorney to investigate and find out the truth. So I bring to this that desire of knowing what the truth is and then applying that truth to the law, because that's what I have to do as a prosecutor. I do the investigation based on what officers, witnesses, evidence has been presented, and I apply it to the law. And then I attempt to make a fair determination to present to the court and say, Judge, this is what you should do. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this is what you should do. As a prosecutor, in making that determination, just as a judge, when you hear witnesses, you're in essence doing the same thing. You're making a determination. What is the truth? And then you're applying that truth to the law. As a prosecutor, I want to win because I'm just competitive. And that's not as a prosecutor, that's just as a person. I want to win. But as a prosecutor, I want to make sure that what I do is right. So the thing that distinguishes me, that I want to bring to this, is the fact that if I have the proof, the evidence, to present it to a jury and win and get a conviction, then that's what I want to do. But if there's proof or there's evidence that establishes that the person may be guilty of a crime but not the crime they're charged with, then I'm the very first one that gets to make that determination and correct that. If they are not guilty of the crime, I'm the very first one that can stop it. But even a little bit further than that, if they're guilty of the crime, and I know they're guilty of the crime, but there has been a technical violation of the law or of their constitutional right, then I have that obligation, responsibility, and I have exercised to make the determination to say, I know you're guilty, but the law in this instance is going to work in your favor, and I have to either reduce or dismiss these charges.
What would Judge Lynch's typical workday look like?
Obviously, that varies from docket to docket, what you may be dealing with, what you may not be dealing with. Just for these purposes, I'll view it as if it were a criminal docket. I believe firmly in a 9 o'clock docket call. During that docket call, that's when you have an opportunity for your attorneys, if they have a simple matter to address, whether it be they need additional time for discovery purposes or negotiation purposes, to deal with those issues. When it comes to lunch, and I'm a firm believer, you don't want to keep your people there and make them work through lunch. So somewhere between that 11 to 12 o'clock range, you're looking to take a lunch. It's hard to say we're, a firm time. I know some people like to do it on a clockwork. We're doing a docket call at 9, 12 o'clock we're going to lunch, 1 o'clock we're back in here. But you have to take into consideration if at 11 o'clock no one has anything to present to you, might be a good time to call a break. Or at 12:05, you got 6 attorneys lined up with announcements, you might need to stay a little bit longer. Obviously, it would be every judge's desire to be able to go through a docket and complete their docket that day. But every single one in this courtroom that's ever been in front of a judge knows sometimes that cannot happen. As a judge, you have to be mindful not only of what your personal preferences would be, but you've got a courtroom full of people that you're influencing, whether it be the clerk's office, your court reporter, courtroom security, other members that are in that courtroom that once you start getting past 4:30 or 5 o'clock, you're impacting their family life. And that is important to me. Obviously, I was very fortunate to have my ex-wife come and speak to me, but the fact that she's my ex-wife maybe give you a little bit of indication I wasn't that great at being a husband, but I am a great dad, and I relish the opportunity to have with my family. And I think that that's important to take into consideration as well.
Somewhat of a pet peeve of mine is seeing a judge out with another attorney having lunch, particularly when I'm not that attorney having lunch with a judge. How would you deal with that?
That question's been popped up before, and I'll say here, We understand it. We have a good bar. We understand that once somebody takes that position as judge, once that's bestowed on them, they have to behave and act differently. And it's not that they're trying to be rude or I'm better than you now or I can only have lunches with other judges. We understand that they have the responsibility and the obligation to avoid that appearance of impropriety. I'm just going to go back to it. As a prosecutor, I already kind of have that. As a prosecutor, we already have a different set of rules that we follow, and I'm already used to being in a situation to where I am not trying to go out and rub elbows with everybody and be big buddies with everybody, because there may be a time when I'm called upon to do something they're not going to like. So I do not believe it would be difficult. I believe, as it was stated earlier by another candidate, you can be respectful, you can be polite, but once you've made that decision and you've been given that opportunity to be a judge, you have to make changes, and one of those would be to avoid that appearance.
As a career prosecutor, how do you change the perhaps public perception that maybe you can't be as fair as to criminal defendants as someone else in your position?
That is a question that I know would apply to me, but I tell you it applies to every single person here. Because regardless of where we come from, we've had a practice. Me as a prosecutor, others may be as a plaintiff's attorney, others as a criminal defense attorney or a civil defense attorney. It's having that ability to understand that once I take the bench, I'm no longer a prosecutor. I'm a judge. My responsibility and obligation is to sit here and be fair and impartial. I'll tell you again, I come back to it, as a prosecutor, I'm already there. Because as a prosecutor, I do not represent a client, a human being that has come in and paid me to fight for them. I've been appointed by an elected official to represent the state of Tennessee, and that means that I am to search for the truth. And if that means that a person has been charged, needs to be released, or their charges be dropped, then I'll do that. So to answer your question, I would say it's like putting on an old hat.
If you're not appointed by the governor for this position, would you run in the race for that position regardless?
That question was asked last time I appeared back in 2012. And I really didn't know how to answer, because obviously I would want to say absolutely. But I'm just going to flat out tell you, it depends on who it is. Because we have some good judges. And I remember when Keith Siskin was appointed when I went through, and Keith Siskin was chosen. And you wouldn't find a way to convince me to run against Keith Siskin, because he was a good man, he was a hard-working man, and he would do a good job. And I didn't see the need or coming anywhere close to the desire to try and take that away from him. So to answer your question is, I don't know, because it depends on who the candidate would be.
That's all the question I have. Thank you, Mr. Lynch, for participating in the process.
Thank you very much, sir.
Mr. Lentz, I just have a few quick questions, if you don't mind.
Yes, sir.
District attorney I grew up with was Tom Shriver, who's fairly legendary, and General Shriver used to have a saying when he was trying to make a decision or help his assistants make a decision about prosecuting or not, and he'd say there's a difference between a bad boy and a criminal. What do you think the difference between a bad boy and a criminal is?
About legally or my personal opinion. A bad boy, I would say, is just my personal opinion.
Well, and I think what I'm really kind of get to is you're going to have to make a decision to prosecute. If it's a bad boy, criminal.
I understand. In making that decision, you have to look at all the circumstances surrounding whatever the action were. You can have a group of young men that wind up boosting mom and daddy's car, go driving around throughout the night, picked up a six-pack of beer, wind up getting themselves in a little bit of trouble. They're not bad kids. They made a bad choice. Living in a college town is a good example. Living with MTSU. On a routine basis, we're going to have young men and women come through our court systems on underage consumptions, simple possessions, even driving under the influence. Very dangerous offense. Just because you've been charged with it doesn't make you a bad person or, as you say, a criminal. It's being able to make that distinction and take a look at the case and finding out a little bit more about the individual. I personally handle all cases in criminal court in Cannon County. I handle all the juvenile matters, all the general sessions matters. So any criminal case that occurs in Cannon County, it comes through me. And so as your question makes more sense to me, I deal with that on a regular basis. And I have to tell you, it's one of those where you have to follow your instincts, you follow your ability when you sit down and interview with them or you talk with them. It is not uncommon for me when I'm dealing with an attorney and they want me to consider that. First thing I'll say is, okay, go get them. Go get them and bring them in here and let me talk to them. First words out of my mouth will be, don't answer any question I ask you unless your attorney tells you first that you can answer it. But then I will sit down and I will spend 10, 15 minutes talking with the young man, the young woman, to make that determination. And there are simply times that as a prosecutor, I may have the ability to make that determination. You made a mistake, but this doesn't need to haunt you for the rest of your life. Let's find some other alternative.
My next question, there is going to be a difference perhaps between your official position and your personal opinion. And now I'm really asking it from your personal point of view as a legal professional. And it's a broad question, but do you think that the public defenders and the indigent criminal defense side are being adequately funded right now?
Adequately funded?
Funded. They have enough resources?
We have a great relationship with our public defender's office. I work with the men and women there on a regular basis, and I'll tell you flat out, no. No, they don't. You have men and women that come before the court and they're appointed to represent an individual, and they can get some serious cases. You have co-defendants in a homicide case, and it may not be a capital case as far as first degree, but it could be second degree or something lower, and they're getting paid something that can potentially cripple their practice. So I would say, without question, no, they are not adequately funded. But I imagine that could be argued through many aspects of our law enforcement, our teachers, our prosecutors. But specifically to our defense bar and the public defenders, no, sir, I don't believe they are.
I have one final question, and this is a situation where Bill Koch rushes in where angels fear to tread sometimes. And it's occurred to me that it's very important for trial judges working in the same district to be collegial, to get along, and there certainly has been a history down here of that, and you've expressed a desire to have that continue. When the judges, after the appointment's made and the judges are going to sit down to decide who's going to do what, assuming you're appointed, you have two of the current judges who come from the defense side. You'll be a judge from the state side. How do you think that ought to be handled?
And I apologize if I'm not quite tracking, but I would say once you step into that room as a judge, what I did before, that was it. We're here for it.
And I'm not asking necessarily about you. There's also an importance of an appearance of impartiality. And, let's face it, folks, when you get on the bench, people know where you came from.
Yes.
And that doesn't mean you don't transcend that and you be fair, but I'm just trying to see if you have a feel for how that discussion ought to go in terms of when we talk about the criminal docket.
Well, the first thing I would probably rely upon would be my reputation with the current sitting judges as a prosecutor and how they viewed me on what I did. So when I came in, are they going to be able to say, well, as a prosecutor, he wasn't over there pounding on the table every single time somebody came before me on a violation or I'm sentencing, screaming, send him to jail, send him to jail, they're the devil, send him to jail. It is he fair? Did he follow the law? Did he do his job? I bring that background in there with me, and then in discussion with the judges about how things should appear, I would submit to you that the biggest thing about it is only time can really tell. You're absolutely right. When I first sat down, if I were to be appointed and I first sat down, there's going to be a lot of them that go, well, that's that former prosecutor. And did you know his name is Lynch? That's Judge Lynch. What are we going to do? It's just going to be a situation to where time will tell, but I have no doubt in what I have done over the years that once I take that position, I would not be sitting as a prosecutor that is a judge. I'm sitting as a judge.
Thank you. That's a great answer. And it's one of the reasons why we'd be very timid to appoint Judge Lawless. Thank you.
May I ask a question?
Yes.
Okay, sorry.
Certainly. I'm sorry.
No, I think when you looked down, you thought we all were. I have a question for you. In your application, and again, obviously coming from my background, you talk about meeting with victims, hundreds of victims and families. What have you learned from that experience? Because sometimes those meetings don't go so well. What have you learned from that experience that you think would help you if you were selected for this position?
The number one thing every single person is going to sit as a judge should have the ability to do, and that's to listen. You'd be surprised how many times a case can resolve itself, or you can come to some resolution, and you will have the ability to listen. So when you hear a victim and they talk about what they went through, or what their family went through, or how it's impacted them, you let them talk. You let them have that control and tell you what they want you to know before you start doing anything else. And that's what I've learned from victims. They want to have their story told. And as a prosecutor, if I can tell that story for them through the course of a hearing, proceeding, or the trial, I will. It's always very difficult when you may have to tell them, my heart hurts for you, but I cannot do that. Our laws will not allow us to do that, and I'm not going to try and do that. And I have to encourage you and tell you now, do not try to do that when you're called as a witness, because that will end badly for all of us.
They're telling me I need to speak in this mic. I thought I was usually loud enough. I just want to make a comment about General Lynch, or Mr. Lynch, excuse me. I've had a good number of cases, and what I've always appreciated about you, and I shared this in my office, is that you're always willing to listen, and that's part of your theme here today, is being a good listener. And you have a willingness when you've got a case that doesn't have the fact scenario, you're willing to dismiss the case, retire the case, and I've always appreciated that, because it's not always done with some prosecutors across the state. So I've always appreciated about you is that you're a good listener. You'll weigh the facts and the law, and if a case needs to go away, you're willing to do it. And I've always appreciated that about you, and I certainly think you're qualified the last time. You're well qualified this time. Good luck.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
I actually don't have any questions for you. I just observation that you are very, very well qualified, and I remember you from last time because you got less hair than I did. So
Yes, sir, I do. A little more of me down here and a little less up there.
I have no questions. Thank you.
Thank you
Again, appreciate it. Ashide?
Hello.
Hello again.
Ashad, they instructed us to use the mic, so hopefully I don't have it too loud or too quiet. First, thank you for coming over and meeting with me last week. I enjoyed sitting with you and visiting for a while. And
Sure, I appreciated the meeting.
I always think it's important to talk about, in my mind, it's important that a trial judge in particular understands the community they're going to serve. And something that stood out to me, and I don't know if you and I necessarily talked about it in particular, but it looks like you moved to Rutherford County when you were a child.
I did. I moved here, I started 8th grade here, so it was at Central Middle, which is now Central Magnet High School. So years ago, my family moved here. My father was in insurance. My mom was a nurse. Although my father went to law school and has a law degree and passed the bar in Nebraska and Iowa, but he turned to insurance because he had too many kids to raise early on. So that's what landed us here. I was like an Army brat, but it was more insurance brat, so.
Feel like you understand the community.
When I moved here, we had 2 high schools. So we had Oakland and Riverdale. Now we have, 8? We had Laverne and Smyrna, and everybody knew each other. And so my class that I graduated with was very active, let me just say that. My class of '84 high school in my election. My class at MTSU and my friends and everybody that I met, my clients. I know a lot of people here in Rutherford County. My dad was very loud and knew a lot of people here in Rutherford County. My mom knew the medical people here, and so it's just, this is little, I was called Little Eyeshide, and I know I'm 6 foot tall, but I was the 4th of 4 kids, so I was a little Eyeshide then. And that's just stuck, and I got to know so many people, and just like Gary was here today, I've known him since high school, and I've kept those relationships. So I do believe that I'm pretty invested here. I thought a lot about not coming back to Rutherford County and practicing. And I made a deal with my father, and I did it because I thought about staying in Knoxville. I thought about going to the big city, Nashville. And I had somebody tell me, a very good friend of mine's dad, would you rather be a little fish in a big city or a big fish in a little city? And Murfreesboro was a little city then. I said, well, I'd rather do that. So I came back home.
Professionally, we talked about the different types of work you've done, and I'm not exactly sure where to start. I mean, maybe we just go through everything a circuit judge could possibly do. You've done criminal work.
I have.
Might share a little bit about your experience in criminal representation.
It seems that toward the end of my career as a trial attorney, I did a lot of domestic. And domestic brought on criminal clients, unfortunately. And once you were in the criminal bar here, they make you, if you're going to represent somebody for money, then you got to represent them pro bono, which was fine. You would get the little harder cases. So I've been appointed to murder cases. Now, thank goodness we did not have to try those, and we were able to work them out. But I've had criminal cases. I've done domestic cases. Toward the end of, like I said before, I became a judge, I was doing a lot more probate. I'm at that stage in my life where my friends' parents are either needing work, estate planning, needing help, they're passing, they need to go through the probate process. And I was really doing a lot of that at the time that I ran. And then I've also, when you got to get food on the table, you take just about anything. I've done contract cases. I've represented businesses. You name it, I probably have done it. And at first, I went all around. So I was in Davidson County. I was in Williamson County. I was fortunate enough to have a nice enough practice to stay in Rutherford County. I knew my judges. I felt like I could represent my clients a lot better if I just stayed here, because I knew what they liked, I knew what they didn't like, I knew how to present a case well. So went to Bedford County. So I went to a lot of other counties early on in my career.
I know we don't know for sure, but the talk is that this particular position will be probably a civil a role in heavy domestic. Is that right?
Yes, and I think I heard the same thing that Mr. Scarlett heard from the presiding judge, is that they already met. They met and they assigned it to civil. We've got 85% domestic, I think, cases here. It's a huge, just a lot of domestic cases here. So it's my understanding it's going to be a civil position. I think when the General Assembly, when we got the position, they didn't give us a DA and they didn't give us a public defender. So that makes you kind of think, okay, that's what it is. But I do understand the presiding judge has taken 2 months of the grand jury, so they've kind of apportioned it like that.
Currently serve on the General Sessions bench, but let's talk about, say, the 5 years before you were elected. and share what proportion of your practice was domestic.
5 years before I was elected, I'd say about 85%. I had a huge domestic practice. And my others was criminal, which I enjoyed. I like defending my criminals. Then, like I said, started getting a little bit more to estates and planning and stuff like that. So I had a very large domestic practice.
Touched on it, but a significant question always is the ability to run a campaign, and it's worth talking about that right now. You've done that, so share your thoughts on that experience, the good, the bad, and the idea of potentially doing that again.
Right. It's an experience. Running a campaign is nothing that I imagined when I jumped into it. Like I said, my committee was a bunch of my best friends. Everyone had a talent. And I can talk to people. I don't mind talking to people. I love talking to people. And so actually going out there and talking to them. But I think I had a little insecurity in that sometimes as a domestic attorney, you can't really remember if you represented a wife or husband, and you go up to them and they're like, yeah, you represented my wife. I'm like, oh, okay, I'm sorry about that. I'm running for judge now. I think that was the only thing that kind of caught me off guard is sometimes, and that happened on 2 occasions, but I'm here. They didn't kill me, so that's good. They probably voted for me because they didn't want me to keep representing their spouse against them. I probably had a lot of that vote, the opposite side. And I honestly did everything I could do in this county. And I've lived here since '78. I never realized how big our county is. It's huge. I remember my very first thing, I went to the Las Casas Fish Fry, which Mr. Ward talked about that, and I gained about 20 pounds during the election, which is terrible, but you have to eat because they get mad if you don't. From Las Casas, I had to go all the way out to Eagleville, and I had to get there so Las Casas was a fish fry. Eagleville was a celebrity Beasley Foundation for Paws and Pearls, which is dear to my heart. And you know, I'm changing clothes. I mean, I'm not getting indecent or anything in the car, trying to go from a T-shirt wearing to kind of a nice clothing. But it was neat. It made me get out there, and I think as a domestic attorney, I was scared to get involved into too many things for the very reason of, you represented my spouse, I hate you. You know, it's out there, I hate to say it, but as a judge, it's cool that you can go in there because you're not representing anybody. You're representing the Rutherford County, and you're trying to make Rutherford County better. And so I like that hat in that I don't have as much angry eyes at me, so.
We're just a few weeks away from your 2nd anniversary as a general session.
I am.
Why leave that if you like it?
I love it. And I think the main thing that I miss is I miss using my mind as much, the critical thinking. I miss arguing. I miss listening to good arguments. I miss weighing the law. I hear preliminary hearings, which that's the best thing I do. Except search warrants, I love those. Those are fun. But preliminary hearings, when they have good attorneys, the ADAs are great, and I got some great public defenders and general defense attorneys. I love hearing their argument. I like them to stump me to where I have to go back in chambers and read, okay, what does that hearsay rule say again? I don't get it much, and I don't get any of that much. And so I miss the critical thinking. I miss I just miss that part of it. I'm a person that likes to stay busy. I don't like to be sedentary, and if my docket's done, I'm doing something else for my position. So I just recently started the environmental law court for Rutherford County. The commissioners wanted it, and I'm like, yeah, I got time. I'll do it. I think that doing new things and actually hearing cases that I've never heard before, learning new aspects of law. I want to learn more. So I think that's why I'm reaching out for this position. And it's not because I don't like what I do. I absolutely love it. It's just, I think my mind would be used a lot more probably if I had it.
Biggest change in your life that you can think of, maybe the first thing that comes to your mind now that you've been a judge for 2 years?
I'm the life of the party. No, I'm kidding. I'm teasing. I love, like I said, not being the adversary. I like being the neutral. I like trying to solve problems that we have in this county. I like not having a target on me and just being just that part. I don't really think that when you go to a party, people like you more or anything like that. There is more of a respect, and it's funny because you can make a lot more money as a private attorney, but you never get the respect. And I think that's kind of neat for the position too. So it doesn't make you, although everybody said they voted for me, which is funny too, when I know I didn't win by that much. I just like being the neutral person.
Something that stood out to me that you said was your willingness to learn from others, and most of us know Judge Tidwell, and you talked about when you first came on the General Sessions bench, ability and desire to draw from your colleagues. So I want you to share a little about that.
I think people imagine when you put that black robe on, it's going to make you a whole lot smarter, and that doesn't happen. One of my first hearings, and I hear cases when I started out at the jail because we didn't have this big, beautiful judicial center. And so I came over and Judge Tidwell was like, hey, you want to go do that prelim? And yeah, I'll do it. And it was like the craziest prelim, and I'm like, okay. And so I go, I'm going to take 5 minutes and go look at this, and I look at the law, and then I go up to Judge Tidwell, and I'm like, hey, why do I get these cases? And did you know this was going to happen? Is that why you asked me to hear it? And I told him my thoughts and asked him his opinion, and gosh, he was so helpful. And he said, you're right. You're on the right path, and that's a good ruling. And I think if you don't use your judges and ask them, especially as a young judge, you're losing a lot of just free good advice that you can have. And so I miss Judge Tidwell. I do. He was so nice, and he was so easygoing, easy to practice with, always there to help me, and so is Judge McFarland. I mean, Judge McFarland, I've had a couple things that right off the bat, and I'm like, are y'all picking on me? And something else, and it was a pretty huge decision, and I went over it with Judge McFarland and Judge Tidwell before, and we were all like, yeah, and so I like asking their opinion. I'm not, like I said, I'm not the smartest person out there, and it's good to ask other people for their advice, especially if you got willing judges that are there to help you. So they were, and I didn't go to judges school for some reason. I was an off election, so they didn't teach me that stuff. So I had good judges to help me.
Beyond Judge Tidwell, what's your relationship with the other circuit judges?
Oh gosh, I've practiced in front of them for 25 years. Let's see, Judge Taylor's been here for I don't know how long. Judge Taylor was civil before he's now criminal. And before Judge Rogers got on the bench, I associated with Judge Rogers. And then once he got on the bench, he recused himself from every case I had. And so Judge Taylor was my personal judge. It ended up because they were the two civil judges. And he was finally like, after 8 years, okay, Judge Rogers, you got to start listening to, Lisa Eichscheid. So I think I've got a really great working relationship. Chancellor Wilson he got on the bench 2 years before I ran, so I had 2 years to practice in front of him, and he was wonderful. And so I've known Chancellor Wilson. I mean, he moved here about the same time I was here, so we've all grown together. And then there's Judge Bragg, and he's been here, and he does criminal. I noticed one thing about our bench, and it's funny, if I'll go upstairs, if there's a meeting or something, I'll see a judge in there, hey, what do you think about this? And they do, believe it or not, they talk about cases, and they ask, even after serving for 20 years, hey, and I think it's good to balance the issues, and I've seen them do that, and I know that they're going to be there for anybody that gets this position, which is great for our bench.
We often ask questions about what people like to do when they're not on the bench. I'm convinced after we met that you talked to somebody and tried to find out what I love, because when you said boating and lake and Labrador retrievers, I'm thinking.
We had a lot in common there, didn't we?
That's right, but I'm assuming you had a good time this weekend at the lake, and that's a good retreat and a release for you.
It is. It's in a different county. It's actually over in Franklin County, and I tell you, it's something about water. Once you go and you look at it, you just exhale. It's okay, this is nice. And really, not many people from Murfreesboro go to that lake. A lot of people go to Center Hill, and I go to Timms Ford. And I probably started doing that 20 years ago because, again, doing the practice I had, I really didn't want to run into people I knew. And it is great. I've got 3 dogs I can't keep out of the water, and they stink because they're always in the water. Actually bathed them last night. But it's a great release, and it's water just is a peaceful. It brings you peace, and I've done it for years. I'm sure if you ask Mr. McCarter, where's Lisa? She's probably on the water. That's what I do.
Chairman Koch, I pass witness.
I don't have any questions, but I've enjoyed hearing you today.
Thank you. A truer statement has never been written, let me assure you of that. Secondly, I can only hope that the fellow that stole the transmission from your 1967 Cadillac DeVille rotted in jail. Oh, I hope he did. I've heard y'all ask, what happens with your mad? Oh, Lord. I was so mad when I had to go pick my Cadillac up, and it was to fix the window, the rear window. That's all it was. And my guy that picked it up said, this isn't your transmission. And I'm like, what do you mean? And he goes, the guy was selling these parts of old cars on the internet. So I dismissed my suit, although I spent, $300 to file and he got his in criminal court, which I loved. So it was wonderful. Where I come from, that would have been a capital offense. In Grundy County, no, I'm kidding. All right, thank you. It was actually for a divorce attorney, and Bill Penrose, and he was wonderful. This is funny because I'd finished my first year of law school, and you wouldn't believe the arm twisting they did to try to get me to transfer to Stetson. They offered a house on the beach, or a little one behind a house, not the big house, imagine that. They offered everything, and I said, my family will kill me if I don't graduate from Tennessee. So I said, nope, I'm going to pass this. I'm going to go back to Knoxville.
One of the attractions of Stetson is that beach right.
Did you go to law school there, or did you go to?
I went to law school.
Did you really? Law.
Law school, I suppose to.
It's hard to do.
That's it. One other question I noticed is that you indicated that if you're selected, that this circuit has never had a female circuit judge.
That's true.
Qualities to the bench from that diversity. So talk to us a little bit about that.
It seems like I go after positions that are brand new. The one I took was brand new, and Rutherford County never had a female general sessions judge, ever. And it added a lot of diversity to the general sessions bench. I do look at things different, and I've got judges that listen to my opinion, and we've changed a lot, actually, in the last 2 years, which I love. I think that our county, as y'all know, that's why we got this position, is just getting huge. And we've never had a female in circuit. Actually, we never had him go for it. So I don't blame our citizens. Nobody's run for it. And the first time a female's run for anything was my nine people member election that I went through. And so I do think women look at things a little differently. I think that it might make our litigants a little bit more, I remember I probably represent more men than women, but the women were like, well, why can't we go before a female judge? And the men hired, and I don't know if you've known this, Mr. North, they liked women to represent them in divorce better than men, and they wanted women judges. I don't get it, because they might have done something they shouldn't have, I think that it would bring a lot of diversity to our bench. I think that just having a woman up there and talk to the other, they meet a lot, they talk about different issues. It's time. I think it's time. Not if I'm the right candidate, but it's time.
Ashad, you and I had a lot of cases together, and I've appeared before you a handful of times since you've taken the bench. One thing you said is that we have great judges, and you're right there with them. I mean, you're a great judge. We're not supposed to call you judge in this forum, but you're an outstanding judge, and you're right there with them, and certainly well qualified for the position.
Well, I appreciate that.
Chemistry and biology.
I know.
As everybody knows, several times I did go to MTSU, and those aren't easy classes.
I thought I was going to be a doctor.
I am just going to make one comment, and that is, you have a good friend in the clerk and master in Davidson County, and Maria called me and discussed you at length, and actually we sat down, and if you're half the person that she portrayed you to be, you would be a credit to the circuit bench here. And I just mentioned that to you. If you didn't know that she was that good a friend, you do now. And Mark Pirtle, I mean, he wore me out. So that being said, I appreciate your application. I don't have any other comments to make, and I will pass it over.
Thank you for being here today. Obviously, you're an eminently qualified candidate. I have no questions.
Thank you.
We were talking about litigants appearing in court. Have you had experience yet in General Sessions Court with the sovereign citizens?
Yes. Yes, I have. They don't tell you about that either. Well, actually, they did tell me, and boy, that's a different experience.
Well, and I'm asking you about that because I asked one of the earlier applicants about button pushing, and certainly that's part of what the sovereign citizens are up to. So I'm just curious, how did you deal?
You know, Judge McFarland gave me some really good lessons about it. They talked to us at the judicial conference about it. And basically, that's when you don't really give them their right to talk. And you say, you're charged with A, B, and C. What would you like to do with your case today? Well, you're not okay, so do you want to have a hearing on it? Is that what you do? Well, you don't have authority yet. Well, that's what you want to do, then we'll have a hearing. What you're going to do is have a seat. We'll get the district attorney in here. We'll have a hearing. Well, and then they'll go, I said, you can have a continuance to get an attorney. Most of the smarter ones will get the continuance. If they want the hearing, the DAs they know what to do with them too. But you just don't give them their platform. And so that's what I've learned to do. I don't give them that platform. I take it away.
Completely different category, though. You also have many pro se litigants who simply cannot afford to hire a lawyer.
Right.
Some of them think they can do just as well as lawyers. There's different ways they get there. But it seems like it's a very tricky matter to figure out the balance when you have an attorney on one side and a pro se on the other side.
Most of the time, our district attorneys are really good. What I'll do is I'll call the docket, and they come up pro se, and if it's a minor misdemeanor, I'll say, look, I'll let you go talk to the district attorney, and if you can't resolve it, then you can come back and see me, and we'll apply, see if you can, if you qualify for a public defender, and if you want to get your own attorney, you can do that. So I give them a chance. 99% of them settle because our district attorneys are talking to them. They're making them pretty good offers. And then if they come back and they don't like, and if it's a felony, I immediately say, are you going to be able to afford an attorney? Because I know you can't settle that down in general sessions normally. And then they say no, I'll immediately appoint them at counsel, reset it for them to get prepared for the case. So I really try to take care of my pro ses. I do. I don't think anybody deserves not to be represented, especially if it's a very serious crime. So honestly, I don't think anybody allows a pro se to go forward. They might push it to the end, and you'll say, if that's what you want, and I have not to this day had a pro se preliminary hearing.
How would you translate how you're handling that to a domestic docket, because there's an increasing number of pro se litigants there too.
You know,
and I guess what I'm trying to hone in on is that the judge's role is to be impartial.
Right.
Natural human tendency when you see somebody who's in the deep end of the pool, throw them some help. And I'm not being critical of that
Right.
impulse, but how would you juggle that?
There's a lot of safeguards before that deep end happens, and so I think it's how you run your courtroom to begin with. You know, when a attorney files a divorce and a pro se answers, you know, and might be the first hearing, might be a motion hearing, just say, okay, you understand this person knows the law, you don't. We can't assist you with that. You try to inform them and let them know. Hopefully, if they go to mediation, it gets resolved. But if they're at trial, you got to be the neutral. And you know, I can't. Kind of like what I'll do, you get a lot of pro se, I'll tell you, get a lot. I do the trooper docket, so I get a lot of pro ses that want to have their speeding ticket heard, and I'll say, you can ask questions, and I'll kind of, you know, I'll tell them the procedure, okay, that the state trooper's going to give his testimony, you can ask him questions, you know, and then they'll start saying their side. I said, okay, you don't want to ask them, so you just kind of lead them through it, and that's just what you got to do.
Just one final question. You now have somewhat of a track record on the bench. What do you expect the lawyers are telling each other what the unwritten rules are when they're coming before you?
Oh, in general, be prepared. Be on time. I like that. We call the docket at 8:30. Honestly, I think be prepared, be on time, make sure your client's there, because then if they're not, a capias is going to get hit.
Let's assume that somebody's not prepared or is not on time or their client is there. What are they?
And their client's not there?
Yeah, what do they get?
It's capias. I'll put them in jail. You know, I think some of the defense attorneys got mad with me because every defendant needs to show up for it, and well, you know, I've got them here, I've got them there. I said, that's fine. You come in and you let me see them, and then I'll give you the warrant to go talk to the DA. A lot of things were kind of happening without people appearing and stuff like that, and so that's kind of how I handled it. And they kind of probably got a little mad at me, but I just want to make sure if somebody without attorney, if they're there, I don't want to give anybody any. I want to be impartial, so I want to treat everybody the same. And so it doesn't matter if it's the $500 lawyer or it's the pro se litigant. He had to be there on time, so should the other person.
Thank you so much.
All right, thank y'all.
Todd?
Debating lunch or not, and so I hesitated a moment. I didn't know if we were at the break yet or not.
I think we're good, and we're not that hungry that we can't listen. So.
There you go. Please. Thank you, Mr. McCleary. I enjoyed talking to you.
What is your favorite type of law?
Well, as you know, I'm the juvenile court magistrate, so obviously juvenile law is something I've been involved with. Even before being a magistrate, I took appointments in juvenile court, which is primarily how you practice in juvenile court. There's always say I know which lawyers are making money, and those are the ones that don't come before me very often. Although we have some parentage cases out there, but juvenile law has been close to my heart. For many years, almost since I first started practicing. When I first got into the law, it was my last 2 years of law school, and I worked for a local firm, and I was a title searcher. And before that, I was a real estate loan officer originating mortgage loans. So the other area of law that I've got a great deal of experience in is real estate and title issues. So if I had to pick some favorites, I guess those are the ones, just because primarily it's the most experience that I've had as far as from the beginning, and of course now in my current role. Most of my time outside my practice revolves around my children. And I've coached them and other kids throughout the county in every sport except for football. I've coached a lot of soccer, a lot of softball, some baseball, some basketball. I love sports. My kids love sports. So if I'm not following them around or coaching them somewhere, then we're usually spectating at some sort of sporting event. So most of my efforts then outside as far as giving back to the community has to do with coaching young people and being involved in my children's lives and their various school teams and supporting those booster clubs and things associated with their athletics.
What are your favorite courtroom memories?
Favorite courtroom memories. For me, my best courtroom memories involve presiding in juvenile court. When you work a dependence and neglect case, for example, from beginning to end, and you're presiding over the preliminary hearing where the Department of Children's Services has removed a child from a home, and you see the state in which the family is in disarray, drug abuse, drug use in the home, and you see the change that occurs over the time they've taken advantage of the services that's been provided to them. There's been countless times where I've been able then at the end to preside over the family being reunited. And it's really hard to beat that if you're talking about what happens in a courtroom when families reunited and healed and children are back with their parents and it's a successful story. Those are the things we strive for in juvenile court. And there's not one particular occasion because we've had the good fortune to have that happen fairly often, not as often as we would like. But the success of children thriving and overcoming their own adversity or that of their parents or all together and seeing them become whole again and moving forward with life. And sometimes even coming back to us with success stories, graduating college or other, we have that from time to time in our court where we hear from children who had been through our system, either on the delinquent side or independent neglect, and those are always uplifting moments. And it gives you a sense of your purpose when you realize that really is the reason we are there is to be of service to those folks. And so those memories of reuniting families is sort of the lasting memory that sticks with me. Am I on a time limit on this one? To go back to sort of piggyback off Dean Koch's comments, probably a month after I took over for Judge Siskin, the full-time position, I was part-time, I came on full-time, he heard and I stepped into his role as the child support magistrate, 4D court and juvenile court. And probably been doing the job full-time about a month. And as Judge Eichstadt said, you call the docket, and my custom is, because we were very crowded and to keep people from shouting out, I just ask them to briefly stand so I can say, okay, you're here and you're here, so everybody's here and we're ready to go when we come back for a second time through the docket. Gentleman stands up on the back right, I can still see him. He stands up, but he's not sitting down. He wants his case heard right now. So it took me a few seconds, but he was a sovereign citizen. And of course, he wants to question me and talk about my authority over him, and he demanded a hearing right then. And so it was difficult. It was very challenging, and I got through it. I had to eventually refuse to sit. He was not as some of them are. I've been cussed at and screamed at, but he wasn't disrespectful necessarily in his tone or language, but he just refused to sit down and refused to stop talking. So obviously, at some point, I had to call the deputies in and have him removed to the back because I had to get through with my docket, which is their goal, as Dean Koch points out. Their goal is to disrupt and put you off your game, and you should be focusing over here, and they're playing the shell game of getting you to focus over there. And through the years, we've had other sovereigns that have appeared very often in juvenile court. There are many pro se litigants. We have an inordinate number of pro se litigants in juvenile court. And so they can be difficult and challenging for various and sundry reasons. Because they are not learned in the law, they become frustrated, and that frustration often leads to anger. And so there's been many occasions where we've had to deal with that and the degrees of success of that. The ultimate goal is to stop a disruption and to try to keep the litigant calm so that things don't get out of hand. You try to use education to educate them as to the fact that there is a process and a procedure, and despite the fact that you may not be learned in that process or procedure, we're still going to have to follow that process and procedure. And there's only so much you can do, because you can't litigate or lawyer the case for them. My line for them typically is that I'm not a lawyer coach. I can't coach you through and tell you what to ask. They often ask me, well, what do you want me to say? What do you want to know? And that's just not how it works. And I typically tell them, you understand I'm neutral, so if I tell you how to prosecute your case, then the party that's on the other side, it's not going to be very happy about that. It's going to be one-sided. So I'm here, and that seems to turn a lot of light bulbs on. But I try to get to that point before the anger escalates. The other issue we see is folks come into court under the influence out in our court because of the nature of what we do. The allegations against them are often drug use and drug abuse. And in fact, we had a mother come through security with all kinds of drug paraphernalia in her purse, and she came into my courtroom in handcuffs, and she had a warrant out for arrest, and she lit in on the other side of that case. And so we see a lot of anger, but calm and education is the goal to sort of diffuse any of that from escalating to a point that somebody's put in danger. And of course, you have to keep, as best you can, the decorum in the courtroom. And so it's a struggle, and I've had a lot of experience at it, and I'm sure I'm better now than I was, but I'm sure I'm not always perfect, but it is a challenge that occurs in my current position very often. Well, I think I invoked Judge Siskin's name first today. He was my predecessor. We worked together as magistrates when I was the part-time and he was the full-time. And you've heard other people after me talk about his qualities and characteristics. I'm sure that it would be no surprise for me to tell you that, and I said that when I came onto his bench in juvenile court. Unfortunately for you, I'm no Judge Siskin, but I try to emulate the things that folks have talked about from our good friend Judge Siskin. He was smart, and he was calm and cool-headed, and he was kind. And I think that's why you've heard his name so much here today. We still think of him, and I think that if you're asking me from this jurisdiction, that's definitely who I would point to. Well, I do assist Judge Davenport in some administrative duties in my current role. Obviously, she's the primary administrator of the juvenile court. But I think I've had a law office and managed people and throughout the years, which is necessary for any lawyer, which is one of the things they don't talk to you about much in law school. But I think it's personal relationships. I think you have to know the people they're working for you, their strengths. I think you have to be clear-minded in setting your expectations. I think most folks don't mind performing up to a standard, but I think you have to be clear about what your expectations are for them. And you have to have confidence that they have the ability to meet those expectations. And if you put them in a position where you don't think they have the ability to meet those expectations, you're being both unfair to them and to yourself. So I think you have to know your people, you have to be clear about your expectations, and you have to give them the tools that it takes to accomplish the goal that you need them to do. Can I win a campaign? I sure hope so. Everybody's talked about the trials and tribulations of running a campaign, and I think my father always quoted my grandfather in saying that there's two things you never know about: who's going to win an election and what a jury's going to do. And I think I found that to be probably true. But I've been here in Murfreesboro, as I said in my opening, since 1989. I have been involved in the community and been a part of the legal community. And, it is about marshaling resources, and those include money, people, and time. And so I have every expectation that I would be able to run a campaign, and a successful campaign. Thank you, Mr. McCleary.
No questions, thank you.
Thanks.
You shut me up before I even go, and I'm kind of impressed. I've got absolutely no questions, but thank you.
Adam, one thing you said, I think we can all agree on is Keith Siskin was awesome. Awesome man, awesome judge, great person. Certainly well qualified. You sit on the bench. I've practiced before you. Enjoy having cases in front of you. You've done well, and I'm proud of everybody that's applied here today. Just we got an awesome bar, and you're right there with them. I appreciate your application, bud.
Thank you, Mr. McCarter.
During roughly your 6 years, I guess, as a full-time magistrate, what changes have you seen as it relates to, I guess, juvenile behavior? What would you attribute that to? And what lessons do you think you've learned that you could carry to the circuit bench?
I assume you're referring to delinquent?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
That's primarily what
Right.
I'm thinking of.
It's the severity and the age. I think those are the two things that you look at. The severity of the crime or delinquent act and the age of those committing it. I think we've had this year in detention 5 or 6 young people charged with some kind of homicide in the range. I think the use of technology has emboldened young people. They're masters of it. A lot of the crimes that we see involving serious offenses have to do with fake drug deals or fake transactions over stolen property that turn into someone getting robbed and someone eventually has a gun. It's always shocking to me how many of our children are walking around our county in possession of handguns. And it seems to me that it's escalated in my time since I've been involved. I represented delinquent children before I became the part-time magistrate. And across the board in all my time, it seems as though the possession of weapons and drugs by young people is still, even though I hear it on a regular basis, is still mind-boggling to me. But I do think there's kids in Murfreesboro to connect with kids in Laverne or Antioch and meet in the middle over nefarious transactions that end up getting somebody hurt, and so you broaden the scope. Your community is not necessarily Rutherford County because of the technology and the other issues. You're bringing other children in, and so there's a lot that happens here that sometimes don't even include children from here. So I think those are all factors that I've seen to escalate the delinquent issues since I've been on the bench.
And just as a follow-up, as you've dealt with that escalation, what have you learned that you think would serve you well as a circuit court judge?
I think what you learn in adult court is that everybody has a past. So if I'm presiding over a criminal matter or even a domestic matter, you have to understand that human beings struggle to make it in this world, and we all have different struggles, but there are some struggles that the average person can't really comprehend. So there are delinquent kids that we have that make a remarkable change, and there are those that we see in criminal court and general sessions just after they turn 18. But you have to remember where people come from, just like you have to remember where you come from, and you have to put that into your calculus when you're considering any issue involving young people. Dean Coke had brought up Mr. Shriver, who was my criminal law professor at National School, and he used to talk about the Witham defense, and you got to differentiate. Sometimes young people are just with the wrong crowd and they get caught up in things, and so they have a delinquent history, but you got to determine, were they just with them or were they the main instigator? And when you're seeing those folks appear before you at a higher level, you have to keep in mind, where they come from and what their experiences are and what they've been through, and put that in, as I said, into the calculus of deciding whatever's before you. Good afternoon. I'm sorry. We just got a second full-time magistrate approved as of July 1. The county commission approved a second full-time magistrate. So currently, as of July 1, there are 2 full-time magistrates and 1 part-time magistrate that hears pro se cases 1 day a week.
Hear all types of matters, the DNN petitions and the support and the paternity and...
Because of the change with the second full-time magistrate, some of the dockets that I hear have changed as of July 1. Prior to July 1, I heard the 4D docket, child support docket, 2 days a week, every week. I heard trials on Mondays, preliminary hearings and preliminary DCS matters on Wednesdays, and alternating Fridays I had motion docket and special set trial dates for either pro se or represented litigants. So throughout there, though, I'd heard the delinquent plea docket for quite a while. I did the delinquent plea docket. Occasionally, I'll hear a detention docket. Currently, with our system, I'm the on-call magistrate for detention cases, so when a juvenile is brought to the detention center, whatever time of day that might be, or night, it seems to always occur at 3 o'clock in the morning, but nonetheless, I'm the on-call magistrate to make the decision about release or hold and when the court date would be. So my regular dockets after July 1 have gone to Monday, Tuesday, and Thursday as being primarily trial hearings, be it Monday I heard an all-day termination of parental rights case, And yesterday, I heard an all-day severe abuse case on dependency and neglect with the department. So the goal with getting the second full-time magistrate was to relieve the child support docket to free me up to hear more of the trials. So we're talking about backlogs in circuit court and juvenile court. We're out to the first of the year, and so we're trying to expedite some of those and have me freed up to hear some more final full-day hearings.
Other than bringing in the additional magistrate, what action have you taken, if any, to alleviate the backlog?
We have looked at all kinds of possible solutions, and one of the issues in juvenile court is we have certain dockets that we have to have, and we're not necessarily free to break those up. And as was talked about earlier, it becomes difficult when you have a 3-day trial because you need 3 full days straight in a row, and it is disrupted, but unfortunately we are put in positions where we have to do that. And the other issue we struggle with for alleviating that is our pool of appointed lawyers, which most of the lawyers on our dependency and neglect cases are appointed. It becomes rather small, and so there's lots of conflicts between my docket and Judge Davenport's docket and the availability of a DCS lawyer and other things. We came to the conclusion that the best way forward is just to free up an additional magistrate to sort of expedite those cases. We do or have tried to implement docket call and other procedures to clear out some of the cases that weren't being prosecuted, but our efforts are to try to get folks in and get them heard and get more permanency for the families.
Why are you a better choice for this position than the other 6 applicants?
Well, I thought somebody might ask me that, and of course, I know very well the other applicants, practice with them, and they practice in front of me. If I had to differentiate myself, which is I think what you're asking me, is that I think what I do now and what I've done for the last 5.5 years is more akin to what a circuit court judge would be doing, especially if we're talking about being a domestic docket. I've tried cases. I've had cases go to the Court of Appeals that have been upheld on opinions I've written. I've just had that opportunity. It doesn't mean necessarily that somebody else couldn't do that as well, but if you're asking me, my differentiation would be that the duties that I have now and have had, in my view, more closely assimilate to what the circuit court judge would be doing.
Thank you. I don't have anything further.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Box.
Quick questions, really.
Yes, sir.
You have an opinion about restorative justice?
Restorative justice. I'm not sure what context can you, in the form of, in the context of circuit court, what I do now, what
you're doing now?
I'm sorry?
What you're doing now?
It's not something that we deal with a great deal in juvenile court at this point.
One final question. You certainly see children and families who are indigent coming through your system in many different kinds of proceedings, and I'm just curious if you think that the appointed guardians ad litem and the juveniles themselves are being adequately compensated or represented.
I do not. I mean, and I think it's one of the things that lends itself to, as I said, our pool shrinks continually. Folks have to feed their families, and folks want to be of service. We all have chosen to be a lawyer to be of service, but we also have to feed our families, and we see the pool of available folks shrinking for us every day, and it's a challenge. And of course, the same is true in circuit court. There's guardian ad litems and things that are appointed for all kinds of matters, terminations, and other issues. But I do think, I know this AOC and the state have made some efforts to change the compensation schedule, and I think like most things, you know, everybody wants more money and more time. Those are the resources, people, time, and money. But if an honest answer is, in my view, no, it's deficient both in quantity and quality of available folks, and to me it's strictly impacted by the available compensation.
Thank you for your candor and for your answers. I appreciate it very much. Thank
Sure.
you.
Thank you all.
It is now 10 after 12. May I suggest we take a 30-minute lunch break, and we'll return at 12:45 to complete our last interview and to begin our voting. Let us call the meeting of the Commission back to order, and if I may take a moment of personal privilege for any of you in the audience that wonder about the commitment of the members of this Commission to this task and their focus on the work. During the morning session, one of our members, David Golden, became a grandfather again. He has a new granddaughter named Natalie. Daughter and granddaughter are doing fine in Upper East Tennessee, but he's here doing his work. So thank you very much for that. And if all minds are at ease, Ms. Blaylock-Hauser, we're delighted to have you, and Mr. Lawless, I believe, is going to start the questioning.
Okay.
And it's good seeing you.
Good seeing you as well.
And I enjoyed our time that we spent together, talking away. Are you relaxed now, as I told you?
Yes, very much so. I'm very relaxed.
You sound it. You're looking.
Yeah. It's amazing what a burger and fries will do for you.
Well, in going through your resume or your application, there's a lot of things in it that I found candidly quite appealing in terms of you're a normal person. You've worked for a long time. And I'm going to ask just a few points because everybody up here has looked at it. This one good thing about this is we sometimes used to refer to when you go into courts, especially the Court of Appeals, when one member of this commission happened to be there, you always had a hot court. And the same thing when you go into the trial court. I'm going to ask you, what is your thought process of when you're sitting on the bench, staring down at the lawyers and the litigants? Would you call yourself, if you were the judge, a hot judge? That being, you probably know more about the file than anybody else, or would you rather be educated while you're on the bench? That was not a question I asked you, by the way.
I think it takes a good mixture of both of those. I think being prepared for that particular trial or particular issue that's coming before you means that you look at the file the day before, you educate yourself where these people have been, because just like one of my other colleagues said, everybody has a past, everybody has a history, and so it's important to go back and look at that history to kind of educate yourself of where these people have been, but then let the lawyers educate you about the law and how it applies to what it is that you're already looking at in that file. So I think it takes a good balance between both of those in order to be an excellent judge. I think one of my favorite things about some of the judges that I have appeared in front of in the past is when they do ask me questions, because that challenges me, it educates my client, and it lets me know that the judge is engaged in the process. It lets my client know that the judge is engaged in the process. And I think that's very important for our judiciaries, for the public to have that confidence in our judges that we are engaged in the process, and that we do have a role to play in that particular arena, and that it's just as important as their role as that of the lawyer. Everybody has their role to play in order to make sure that the judicial system works well.
One of the first questions I asked you when we were talking about this, and it's been mentioned by another applicant today, but why are you applying for this position?
I think I am this is the one thing that does set me apart, so this may take out someone's question really quickly, but I am probably the only candidate here that has held every single position in the legal system other than judge. I started out at MTSU. I was working as a receptionist for A.G. Allen, Godwin, Morris, and Lorenzo, and yes, I can still say it because that's how we had to answer the phone then. I worked my way into being a secretary for one of the associates. Then I was promoted to be a paralegal for one of the partners. And then after that, I took a little brief recess from the legal system and started my own business. I wanted to tap in some of my creativity. I also became a mother and a wife during that period of time. And then after I sold my business, because I had my daughter and my husband traveled a lot at the time, so somebody had to raise her, I sold my business. I came back to Murfreesboro because I was living in Nashville for just that short period of time. I came back to Murfreesboro, and one of the former individuals that I had worked for saw that I was back in Murfreesboro and asked me to come work part-time. I don't think I worked a part-time day. I went right back into it with the vigor and with the passion and the excitement for the law that I had had before. I worked there with Susan Bradley and Howard Wilson for about a year, and then one day I looked up in my doorway, and there stood Circuit Court Judge Don Ash. I had known Judge Ash from my previous work when I worked with A.G. Allen, Godwin, Morris, and Lorenzo, and he asked me to come and be his judicial assistant. It was while I was his judicial assistant that he spurred me on to go into law school. At the time, I was going through divorce, so I've been through that process. I know what that's like from a litigant's perspective. I was a single mom. I partnered very well with my ex-husband in raising her, and she's here today, like someone else said, and I'm very, very proud of her. Then as I served with Judge Ash as judicial assistant, at times our law clerk would leave, and so I would have to fill into that role as a law clerk for Judge Ash. And then once I got toward the end of my law school career, a position came open here in Rutherford County to which the governor appointed Judge Mark Rogers as the appointee to take that position. Because I was so very close to the end of my law school career, Judge Ash felt like it was important that I help him become acclimated to the bench as I was very, very experienced in that area. So I spent my last 2 years from law school working for Judge Rogers in both the judicial assistant and law clerk capacity. And then I finished my law school career and went immediately into private practice to where I've been now for going on, I guess I'm getting ready to start my 13th year. So.
Kind of done it all, from making the coffee to taking out the trash.
Yes, and as a lawyer, I still do those things. I think that's important because, like I said, I mean, this is a process, and everybody has a role to play. And I think that's what keeps me humble, is because I am still able to do those things, and I don't see myself as being any different than my paralegal, who is absolutely amazing. I really try to work with her and make her part of my team. So I think that's what keeps me humble, is that I still do all of those things. That's not changed despite my title changing.
When we talked, you related your situation from your past with your dad and how that maybe helped shape you a little bit. And I would understand, since we did talk about that, you may not want to discuss it, but I think it's a part of who you are. I think it's a part that helps this commission understand, because I think all 9 of us that are here today, the one thing that's anathema to us is robe fever. And that was one of the things I picked up last time you came before us. I never thought of you as a robe fever type person. But if it wouldn't be imposing too much on you, if you could maybe talk about that just a little.
Actually, I welcome the opportunity to talk about that. What the members here of the commission don't know that Mr. Lawless knows is that at the age of 20 years old, my dad underwent some pretty serious health issues that ultimately affected his mind and his mental health. And my dad took his life on Christmas Eve when I was 20 years old. My mom, who is amazing and was a nurse and helped raise me and my sister as well as my dad, but at that point in time, some really bad things happened during that period, and that really taught me about the importance of listening. My dad, because he had lost his mind, what happened is that he had a surgery that went well from the surgery standpoint, but the complications thereafter were causing him to have small mini strokes. This was some 30 years ago, so that was back when the MRI technology couldn't quite detect those small strokes. At the time that he died, after they did the autopsy, he had approximately 40 mini strokes is what they were able to determine. So that left me and my mom and my sister. My sister and I both were in college at the time. We both ended up putting ourselves through college. To this day, my family celebrates Christmas on Christmas Eve because we certainly don't want the power of that death to take over the reason for life. And in addition to that, it's also helped me be very mindful of mental health. That is something that I think we see a lot in our court system. It's the mental health and the drug addiction components of it. So I have a great understanding as a result of that. That ultimately caused me to go on and decide that I wanted to go to law school and to better myself, because what I learned from that experience is that when bad things happen, you only have two choices in life. You get bitter or you get better. And I decided at that point in time that I was going to better my life. And I hope when it's all said and done, I've not stopped doing it. I want to keep on doing it. And so I think that's why I also want to be judge, is because it continues me on to that next step to better my life. And in turn, hopefully better someone else's along the way.
Also, spend some time teaching, as I'm going to call them, the young minds at MTSU as an adjunct professor. And we did discuss that. For a couple of years you were out there, and I kind of went, they have a course on that. Can you explain a little bit? Because again, a judge also teaches those of us that are lesser mortals and stare up at them.
Well, I was asked to be an adjunct professor at Middle Tennessee State University, which is my alma mater. I have been here in Rutherford County now for, I guess, between Rutherford County and Davidson County for about 30 years now. But I found it an absolute honor to be able to be asked to be an adjunct professor at MTSU in family law. And so when Mr. Lawless asked me that, because I wasn't aware they had that particular class there. Well, they have a paralegal program that allows people to take different types of classes, and family law is part of their 2-year paralegal program, and so I was able to participate in that. I will admit that I found that a whole lot more difficult than I thought it was going to be. Maybe it was just my expectations were very high of the students, or maybe I wasn't nearly as effective as I could have been. I think hindsight is always 20/20, and I think I could have done a little bit better in some aspects. But I really enjoyed the opportunity to teach those folks. And to this day, I have some of those students that are reaching back to me and asking me, "Can you help me with this? You made a lasting impression." And even though that impression at the time may not have been so positive on their perspective, but I've had numerous of them reach out to me and tell me that I made a huge difference in their life, and that made that teaching experience all the difference in the world. I've also had the opportunity to substitute in for Judge Ash from time to time on civil procedure at the Nashville School of Law. He usually asks me maybe once or twice a semester to come in and teach on his behalf when his duties take him elsewhere, and I've absolutely loved that. That has been a really great experience to try and help other people come into the legal system.
You aren't afraid of challenges, at least that's what I've picked up from you very quickly. And if I'm not mistaken, you worked on a case where you sued what is in smaller counties, and I'm going to say Rutherford being smaller than maybe some of the bigger ones in the state. You sued the sheriff, who is, it's not an easy task when you have to use his department to have your process served or do things. Do you want to, and I think that was heard by Chancellor Young, right?
It was Chancellor Young in Nashville.
A former alumni of this particular predecessor body, but can you tell us something about that? Because I'm sure it didn't make you real terribly popular with some folks in the judicial district.
It didn't. I had a lot of pushback from individuals that felt like I shouldn't be taking on that case. But it was important to me because sometimes doing the right thing is not the easy thing. And our citizens in Rutherford County deserve to have their chief lawman to be somebody that they respected, somebody that knew how to follow the law, somebody who didn't think they were above the law. And as time went on and things began to deteriorate at the Sheriff's Department, we started learning more things about the facts that were occurring out there. I met with my partners. I said, guys, we've got to do something. Because I think our judiciary and our legal system is under attack, and it's because of the fact that we don't have individuals of integrity that are willing to put themselves into those, or are not put into those positions, and we're not willing to challenge them because it may not be the right, or it may not be the easy thing to do, or it doesn't feel good. It didn't feel good. It was kind of frightening, especially to my partners who basically practice in criminal law. It was frightening to them. It was frightening to me on a little aspect. But in the long run, what ultimately happened is that that Chancellor Young did find reason to remove him from office. And we never did get to hear the final hearing of that matter because Sheriff Arnold pled guilty in the federal courts and is now serving time in a penitentiary, I believe, in somewhere in Alabama. It wasn't a very easy thing to do. He had family, he had children in this community, and I know that had to be very difficult on them, but I felt like it was most important that the people of Rutherford County have respect and admiration for the officials that they've put their trust in. And since that wasn't happening, we took on that task.
Let me just get one question out of the way as we're working through it, since we're talking, you took on one political. Is it your intention, if appointed, A, to run in 20, or to proceed and run in 22 should an opening come up? In other words, you're going to run to keep the seat if you're selected by the governor.
Absolutely. I think every one of us here are giving up really great jobs that we love, and we're taking on that risk when we go into this particular office. So I definitely would run in 2020 if I'm appointed, and then again in 2022. What I can tell you is that if I'm not appointed by the governor and 2020 comes around, I will not run against the person that is selected by the governor. I think we have to give that person a shot. We have to give them the opportunity to be the best judge that they possibly can be. And 2 years is just not a quality enough time to be able to do that. There's a big, huge learning curve there. I'm aware of that, having worked for 2 different judges. On top of that, they've made a great sacrifice, and I think we have to honor that. Now, in 2022, if another position happens to come open, I don't know where my path is going to be at that time. And if it happens to lead there, certainly I would run in 2022 if there happens to be a spot open and my life happens to be in at the right place at the right time. But I'm not getting any younger, and sometimes we have to say, okay, we're going to let some of the young folks do it, and we'll just ride along. So I'll have to hold judgment on the 2022. But as for right now, 2020, I would run if appointed. If I'm not appointed, I would not run.
Your primary practice area is in domestic relations and the related side things. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Give us an estimated feel for your practice mix.
I would say probably 85% of it are actual divorces. Probably another 10% are post-divorce custody and/or issues. And then there's some child support that are in there that's a small percentage. And then I also work in the juvenile field in dependency, neglect, and termination of parental rights. Especially now, I'm starting to see that area grow a little bit more because of the opioid addiction that we're now seeing in Tennessee. You're starting to see more dependency and neglects. You're starting to see more of the termination of parental rights. And as difficult as those cases are, they're ultimately the death penalty in the civil cases, as our Supreme Court and Court of Appeals have told us. As difficult as those cases are, it's important to be able to do the right thing for the children in this state, because they are our future, and we have to look to those best interests, and that's what a judge has to do, is to look to the best interests of the children, and I think I would have no problem in doing that. But I do think that my practice, based upon what I know of the position here, and I, like some of the others, have talked to the presiding judge and some of the other judges here, it will be all civil from what I understand, and it will be primarily domestic. I would say probably 80% of the cases that are tried here in Rutherford County are now domestic cases. We're just not seeing that many jury trials anymore like we once did, and I think that's unfortunate on a lot of levels. I certainly hope that maybe the tide will turn and the pendulum will swing the other way at some other time to where we have more faith in our jury systems than what some people seem to have. But I would say that because of my practice and the way it is, has best prepared me for this particular position.
We discussed one particular case that you referenced in your application, the conservatorship aspect, and I got about halfway through my questioning and got confused, which doesn't take much, mind you. But I found it just fascinating that you have a ward and you've got all of those issues. And it's just an interesting side case. I'm going to ask you to, without disclosing anything that you can't disclose, maybe discuss that, the marriage or not marriage or sort of kind of whatever it is.
This is one of those fascinating legal issues that after you've been doing domestic for so long, that happens to come up, and you're like, yes, this is something I can get my teeth into, because it's not something that happens on a regular basis. I have a case where an individual, I was the guardian ad litem actually for this individual some 10 years ago when I first started practicing. I love serving in that role as a guardian ad litem and conservatorship type of roles. I have met some wonderful people in doing that. And so this was something, and I just happened out of the blue to get something from the conservator that was appointed to my previous client, saying that they wanted to be removed. And so I felt like I needed to appear, although I haven't been in contact with this family in quite some time. I felt like I needed to appear in front of the judge since I did have notice, and I wanted to be sure that things were transpiring the way that they should. As we got into the facts of the case, and I won't belabor them here, but as we got into the facts of the case, now I've discovered that not only do I have the conservator action, because now the conservator is asking to step down, I have that issue, but apparently the ward has married in that time, has had children, and perhaps those children are not in a very good situation at this point in time. So now this has blossomed from just being a conservatorship type of situation to now I've got a situation where am I going to have to pursue a divorce or a marriage based upon a void principle? Am I going to have to start serving in a dependency neglect action? There's all these different things that now have come to light, but that's the kind of stuff that challenges me, and I really like it. So that's that case in a nutshell. We still shall see how things transpire.
Ever-growing onion, every time you peel something back, is I think how we probably discussed it when we talked, and that's fascinating. Now, let me bring maybe a little negative side to this. You were involved in a lawsuit, and this is more for my neighbor here, involving common law copyright. Something I didn't know existed.
Well, I think
just want you to have a chance to explain it because it's a unique one.
So many years ago, like I said, I went and started my own company. I wanted to have the creative side of me developed a little bit, and I started a catering company in Nashville. As part of that, we went to an auction that was held by the bankruptcy court in Nashville. We bought a lot of the assets of this particular catering company, and one of the things that they auctioned off was the telephone number. And me being young and probably a little naive at the time, thought that, well, this will be a great idea. Not a great idea, because, of course, that telephone number was associated with a lot of bill collectors who were ultimately part of the bankruptcy and weren't very happy and thought we were reopening the business under that particular name. But the former owner of that business sued our company, stating that our menu had similar items to that of his on his menu. There was a couple of sandwiches that were named very similar or something along those lines. So he sued upon the theory of common law copyright. We had a jury trial. Judge Kurtz, I've now remembered who it was that actually overheard that. Judge Kurtz was the one that was overhearing it and kept telling the lawyers, folks, I just don't know that they're going to understand this. I'm concerned, but they wanted to go to the jury. It went to the jury. They found against me, and then Judge Kurtz had to come in as the 13th juror and threw it out and dismissed the lawsuit, stating that that the burden of proof had not been met and that certainly the jurors didn't understand such a very interesting legal topic that wasn't really applied in the state of Tennessee.
You also had the opportunity to become a party defendant involving someone that wanted to look at their file, I believe.
Yes.
And again, I'm not trying to, the reason I'm belaboring some of these things is I'll sort of tie it together here in just a moment. But can you discuss that? And for my fellow commissioners, it's on page 7 of the application. It's the Kersey versus Bratcher et al. Matter.
There was myself and several other members at the courthouse were sued by a gentleman by the name of John Kersey. John Kersey was a disbarred lawyer who took it upon himself to try and push the buttons, we'll say, of different individuals and trying to continue practicing without necessarily practicing. There was a mental health component in that. I'm not going to lie about that. But we were all very aware of him in the courthouse and to be very mindful of him being in the area. To make a long story short, he had come to the clerk's office wanting to see a file. That file was being reviewed by my boss at that time, Judge Rogers, and it was on his desk for consideration. I received a phone call from the clerk's office asking if this gentleman, Mr. Kersey, could come and review the file. At first I was very reluctant because I knew the history of this person and how volatile he could at times be. So I asked if they could send a deputy. I'd be happy to let him look at the file. He could certainly come down. So ultimately they sent him down with a deputy. I gave him the file and told him he could have a seat in the office and look at it as much as he would like. He didn't like that. He wanted to stand over me and again started to push the buttons, started to get very loud. Judge Rogers was on the bench at that time. I tried to remind him, Mr. Kersey, Judge Rogers is on the bench. We need to be quiet. He began to yell even louder. At that point, I just asked the deputies to remove him from the office because I could see that this was not going in a very good direction. And frankly, I was a little nervous. I won't lie. I mean, just because I knew of his history.
You have listed one organization that you considered might be limited in its scope of membership, and I think it was the Junior League.
That's correct.
And it's sort of like some of our applicants today listed the Boy Scouts or the Cub Scouts as being sexist organizations. I just draw out that the Junior League is really more of a help the community type of organization, correct?
Absolutely. They do some phenomenal work, especially here in Rutherford County, with those people who are indigent, with families who are struggling. That seems to be their focus. I really enjoyed my time in the Junior League because I did get to know my community a lot better. That was also at a time that I was going through my divorce, and again, when bad things happen, you get bitter or you get better, and I felt it was important for me to invest in my community. And so I really enjoyed my activities at the junior league, but as my daughter got a little bit older, I had to kind of pull out of those because I was a single parent trying to go to law school and work a full-time position with the judiciary, and there just wasn't enough room for it all.
You're active in your church.
Very.
And the community. And you said one thing when we were talking, and it was a particular strength that you thought you had or felt would help you, and that was that your ability to communicate with people that you either see as clients or that you work with in the system, because you're blue collar. And when you said it to me, it was almost like, well, I'm normal, and not necessarily in a pride sort of way. And I find someone who says and is willing to declare themselves, I'm a blue-collar type person, and I'm not maybe upper crust, as something not to be admired. And I'm going to ask you to discuss that particular attribute that you did with me, and how you use that in the way you react with people.
First of all, I think it's really important for a judge to be able to not just sit on a bench and make judgment, but to show mercy and grace and be able to be respectful to people and give them dignity. A lot of people that come before our judiciary may not necessarily feel that way, and that one interaction could be the change in that person's life towards a positive, for the positive and for the good. I think it's important when we're trying to educate our individuals that are coming in before the judiciary about what does the judiciary mean, what does it mean to be a judge, that everybody has their roles to play, allowing them to be heard, but being able to communicate with them on their level to where they can understand the judiciary, to where they understand exactly the process as it's playing out, and perhaps maybe diffusing some of those high emotions that you often see in domestic cases. The emotion is high, high, high in those types of cases, as Mr. North well knows. And if you're able to communicate with that person, regardless of their upbringing or where they've come from, on their level, there seems to be a connection. And that's really what this life is about, in my opinion, is making connections with people, communicating with people. It's about relationships. And I realize that as a judge that I'm not going to be able to play that same role, but I really think that there's now room for me to grow myself to where I can play a different role, that still I can communicate with these individuals from the bench, but communicate with them to where they understand it and to where they have at least an acceptance of it at the time, to where they can move on with their lives and heal.
You've given a roadmap today of, and I'm stealing Chairman Koch's side of the crazies that come in and the sovereign citizen types, and because you did have that one experience with the disbarred lawyer, you've not had your career handed to you. You've had to work hard for it. You've worked years. Have you, other than having an amazing family, because we did talk about that for a while, is there anything that you see in your future that you want to do that this judgeship may not help you accomplish? In other words, you're going to take a heck of a pay cut. And
Absolutely.
whether anybody thinks that judges get overpaid, I can promise you they don't. And it would probably be a huge pay cut for you. And I know Mr. McCarter would be. Maybe not for you, Kim, but still.
I think it'd be raised.
Probably we would be. But the cost benefit, is it worth it to you?
Well, I think the best things in life are often not bought. I realize that I've been very blessed in my life to be able to work up through a system that I love, that I am very blessed to work in a system to where I am able to make the difference in people's lives. I think that 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 what I see my life moving to now is that now I've got 2 children who are getting ready to graduate from college. I hope that means a pay raise for me in that respect. I'm not certain, but I think it will. But I also have an aging mother who now lives with me part-time, and she lives with my sister part-time. This is going to allow me to be able to focus maybe a little bit more on the things that I've neglected throughout my life, and that's me and my family who have sacrificed so much for me to be here. I would not be here if it hadn't been for all the people that have invested in me, and I'm going to be honest with this commission. A lot of them sit back there and have already appeared in front of you. They've taught me about how to be a good lawyer in a lot of respects through watching them in court and giving me tips and pointers, and they've always been open for me to be able to call them. So I think at this point in time in my life, in transitioning, again, it's not about the money. It's more about the life experience and your journey, and I see my journey going in a different direction now, and I'm excited about the opportunities that it would allow me to be able not just to be a judge, but also be proactive with some of our lawmakers and making sure that the judiciary stays current and making sure that the judiciary stays real to the people of Tennessee. So that's how I would answer that question.
Well, hey, I want to thank you. I was impressed with you last time you were before us. I want to thank you for putting your application in, for coming here today, for giving me another opportunity to talk with you. And at this point, Mr. Chairman, I will yield.
Mr. Golden, you want to go ahead?
No questions, thank you. Nothing's changed from the last time for me. I thought you were qualified the last time. I know you well. I've worked with you, had many cases with you, very qualified. Appreciate your presentation today, Michelle.
Thank you, Mr. McCarter.
I have no questions.
Good to see you as well.
I have one quick question for you. What do you see as being your character trait or lack of experience, whatever it is, that will be your biggest stumbling block if you're chosen for this position?
I could not go to Las Vegas and put all the money on number 8 and somebody not know that that's not the situation. I wear sometimes my feelings on my face. I'm pretty as genuine as I hope most people that meet me. And so it would be hard for me. I think I'm going to have to make that adjustment to having more of that poker face, and in order to be sure that the individuals understand that I'm part of the impartiality portion of the arena. I think that's going to probably be my biggest area to overcome. I've got such a wealth of individuals that I would certainly reach out to on the experience level. If I didn't know something, I'm not afraid to pick up the phone and call someone and let them know I don't know this. I certainly think that I could reach out to our current judges here and ask them questions. They've always been so very helpful to me, and I don't see that changing.
I don't have anything further.
I just want to point out that we've repeatedly heard today the air of friendship and compassion and civility around this community. And throughout the day, I've been sitting here looking at this big stick with a duct tape handle on it. So I'm a little concerned.
I think that belongs to Mr. Scarlett.
But it was a pleasure meeting you the previous time you appeared, and I appreciate you coming again today. I don't have any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Box.
I just have one or two quick questions, if you don't mind. The first is that Ms. Waite, when she was introducing you, talked a great deal about your ability to take the emotion out of things. How do you do that?
I think it's just experience. It takes a while. I've got a new associate in my office that is now learning family law, and I'm teaching her along the way. And one of the things that I told her, I said, when I first started practicing in domestic, because I've done a little bit of everything. Don't get me wrong. I did criminal in the beginning. I did a little bit of I did some employment law in the beginning of my legal career as a lawyer, and then now I'm in domestic. And I told her, I said, there were many nights that I was up late at night worrying over other people's children, trying to make sure that I'd done everything correctly, that I had prepared my case to its fullest. And I said, I remember calling a local lawyer here, and I said, please tell me this gets better, or I'm going to be a crazy person by the time this is said and done. And he said, it does get better with time because you learn how to be able to discern and how to be able to pull yourself out of that motion, because that's really what you need to do in order to be a good lawyer, is to be able to pull yourself out of that emotion. So I think it's just been a matter of me practicing that over and over and over again, because that's what my clients need. They're not coming to hire me as a lawyer to tell them what they need to hear. They're coming to hire me to tell them what they want to hear. They're hiring me to tell them what they need to hear so they can make good decisions for their life and for their children. And so that's how I view that, Chairman.
How do you weigh empathy into all this? How can dispassionate on one end of the scale, empathy on another, how do you balance those two?
You know, I think one of the biggest characteristics that I have is being able to get down to the point. I think that's one of my judges that I worked for taught me how to get down to the true basic points of a case. But more importantly, I think mercy and grace and kindness and humbleness, realizing that these people do have a past. Some of those paths that they're walking are things that I've done as being a single mom that's working, as having someone who's traveled in their life significantly and trying to parent, having aging parents that you're trying to deal with. I think the way that you keep the empathy going is when you stay grounded in who you are. And I've really tried to do that. I try to identify with individuals and realize that we're all broken people. I, too, have got my own issues to have to deal with, and I've tried to do that over the years, and there's been a lot of people that have been very kind enough to be able to give me direction, but give me grace and mercy at the same time. And I see this as my way of being able to return that favor in all of that they've invested in me.
Have a thought one way or the other about collaborative law?
I've learned about that here recently, and there's some questions that I have about that process that I don't quite understand. And in fact, recently I reached out to a couple of the collaborative law lawyers to help me understand about how individuals in the collaborative law process are able to afford those lawyers to help them through the collaborative law process, which I think is an amazing process, by the way, to have other individuals help them make good decisions for their lives before they can come before a judge and that person has to make that decision for them. I think that's an incredible way. But how do those people also afford going on if the collaborative process doesn't work? That's where I think I have a huge concern, is that a lot of times the lawyer that I think I should be is not economically feasible for most people. And that's just the reality of it. So you have to be able to pick and choose. I love the idea of the collaborative law efforts, but I'm still not certain how all of that weaves in and it makes it affordable for the average person, especially when we're starting to see the pro se numbers are just going up significantly.
One final question. We've had different discussions today about the ivory tower that judges get in and the challenge of not becoming trapped in that ivory tower. And I guess one of the things that judges have to do is you have to judge people based on where they are and their circumstances. And we have Gen Xers and millennials, and we have folks that are coming to courts now who have life experiences that are completely foreign to those of us on the bench. So I'm just curious, how are you going to keep in touch? Is your daughter going to do that for you?
Oh, I promise you she will. She educates me every single day.
I mean, I'm thinking of a judge that just within the last couple of weeks was just saying that they had a case where they had to learn the jargon that the witnesses were talking, and this was new to them. So how are you going to stay grounded so you're going to be able to understand where these people are coming from?
Several things. I think I stay active in my community with the people that comprise my community, staying active in organizations that I'm allowed to under the canons, but still don't compromise my integrity and my impartiality. My family definitely keeps me grounded, especially my daughter and my son. They often refer to me and my husband as the king and queen of dorkdom, so they really have to keep me educated on. Yes, they have to keep me educated on a lot of the things as far as the jargon, the technology, those types of things, and they've done a great job. And now I've got nieces and nephews that do the same thing for me. But also, I think there are I don't have a lot of friends that are lawyers that I practice with on a regular basis. I see them as my colleagues. I like to think of them as friends, but as somebody that I associate with on a regular basis, I just don't have that. A lot of my friends are outside the legal spectrum, except for Mary Catherine and a couple of others that we went to Middle Tennessee State University with and graduated from. So I think that's how I stay grounded in that I stay involved in my community. I make sure that my family keeps me grounded. And on top of that, I'm going to be open to some of my other jurists and lawyers that appear in front of me. If I get out of line, I think they know well enough to be able to come and sit down with me and say, listen, I'm concerned. There's a way you can do that and be respectful and be compassionate and be kind, but yet be able to direct that person to make maybe to make some changes that would benefit everybody. And I'm always open to that. I still got a lot of growing to do.
Thank you very much for your candor, and thank you.
Thank you.
We are completed our individual interviews, and it is now come time for us to begin casting our ballots. I would reflect on several comments we made about the financial sacrifices that one makes to go on the bench, and after being on the bench for 30 years, I can pretty well guarantee you that you are not in line for a 775% pay increase. That was a new one on.
Who never was good on that.
Well, that was a new one on me, but that was not meant to be a partisan comment. As I told you when we started, there are 9 of us here, so it is going to take a positive vote of 5 people to bring an applicant forward to a recommendation to the governor. All of us have received green ballots. Please write number 1 in the voting round on your ballots. And fellow commissioners, vote for 3. As Commissioner Lawless reminds us repeatedly, that means 3, not 1, not 2, not 4. That means vote for 3 or your ballot will not be counted. And provide your ballots to our secretary, and our vice chair and the secretary will tabulate the votes. For what? For screwing up the ballot. Not being able to fill out a ballot? Yeah. I would thought he'd be the last person.
Well, you got Hal down there, so you got to be careful.
Well, he's worried
I'm
you don't have to
discouraging
fill
you.
out
I'm
the ballot.
slandering you.
That's different. Well, we're going to see if you're streaks. This could be hard. Do your math. If I might, I have two comments before I announce the result. The first is on behalf of all the members of the commission, we are honored to be here today, and we were privileged to hear the remarks of all 7 applicants, and we believe, as you do, that you have an exceptional bench and bar here in Rutherford and Cannon counties, and you all represented that very well today. That's the first comment. The second comment is you might have seen people making some hand signals up there, and you're wondering what all that is. And ever since our colleague from West Tennessee joined us on the commission, we have been able to select 3 candidates on the first ballot. As one of us were saying, one of the times we were here, it took 13 ballots to get 3 people. But Don's record is intact. We have picked 3 people who have received the number of votes required to go forward to the governor, and they are Michelle Blaylock-Hauser, Lisa Eischeid, and Daryl Scarlett. Congratulations to you all, and thanks to those of you who did apply. This decision casts no reflection on your skill as a lawyer, and the great wheel will turn, and you may very well have another opportunity.
Mr. Chairman, make a motion to adjourn.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
You're adjourned.